Chapter 26. Well, little Luna shook her head and said, "Most low-level curses will not overflow with magic waves. This is the basic knowledge of Iradia. Don't tell me you don't even know this? There are no other medical professions to confirm it, and there is no magic wave overflow. How can you be sure that this is a curse?" Caesar murmured in his heart. Then he looked at Orcash's condition for a while. The more he looked, the more he felt that something was wrong. Damn it, is it just a heat stroke? It must be noted that in a situation where a single dispel could remove most low-level negative statuses, no one would study the concept of disease. If there was a problem, they could just ask a priest. The more powerful the divinity, the better the effect. There was even a forbidden divinity like raise the dead. In front of an omnipotent priest, how could other medical professions survive? Heat stroke was not a serious problem in the world where Caesar came from, because the education level there was quite widespread, and everyone had the necessary knowledge of life. As early as the onset of the illness, they could realize the danger and deal with it immediately. But this was Iradia, a primitive and barren orc. How could they know these things? Even on Earth, heat stroke was quite a serious problem, and the mortality rate could be as high as 80%. Not to mention that the temperature in the dry season in the north was much higher than on Earth. These stupid guys actually put Orcash in an open space without any shelter. No matter how strong an orc's body was, he would not be able to survive. Although Caesar was not 100% sure whether Orcash was suffering from heat stroke, even if it was really the Balrog's curse, these orcs still could not do anything and could only watch Orcash die in pain. Caesar decided to give it a try. He was ready to build the Stone Crow clan into his base and use this group of orcs as his primitive force. Of course, he could not let a strong orc warrior die in front of him. Of course, he also had some dark plans. If he could successfully save this orc, Caesar would have a breakthrough with the Stone Crow clan, and a relationship between him and the orcs would not be purely based on interests. If he succeeded, the stubborn orc would never forget Caesar's kindness. Even if he failed, he would not lose anything. Time waits for no one. After making his decision, he quickly walked toward the crowd of beasts, using his tail to sweep away the beasts in front of him. He then used his large body to forcefully squeeze through the crowd. Ignoring the gazes of others, Caesar grabbed Orcash, who was lying on the ground. His right claw immediately gave him a sticky feeling. This orc was covered in sweat, and his body temperature was not low. This was very consistent with the symptoms of severe heat stroke. This gave Caesar more information about his own judgment. "Orcash, damn it, what are you doing? Let him go." According to the ancient traditions of the Beastmen, if a warrior recognized by the clan died or was about to die, the Beastmen had to hold a farewell ceremony for him and sing an ancient song to witness his death. However, Caesar interrupted this ancient ritual. This caused great dissatisfaction among the Stone Crow clan. For a moment, the crowd was furious. Even the usually calm old wizard Save raised his eyebrows and gripped his bone staff tightly. Caesar did not have enough time to take care of everything, but he knew that he had to explain to the Stone Crow clan. In the history of Iradia, many wars were caused by a ridiculous misunderstanding. "Maybe I can save him," Caesar whispered to Save. After that, without waiting for the crowd to react, he spread out his black wings. His thin cornea almost knocked down some of the orcs, and he brought Orcash back to his nest. "Orcash!" Gull roared. He looked at the figure that was grabbed by Caesar and wanted to chase after him. "Let him try." Save stopped the reckless big warrior. "We can't do anything, but maybe the mysterious dragon has other ways." In the black dragon's nest, the temperature in the cave was much lower than outside. The reason was that there was a huge frozen rock in the corner. Caesar really knew how to enjoy life. He used frost breath to create a cooling rock. Even in the nest, he could still enjoy the pleasant cold air. Ordorenzo. It was rare for Luna to call out Caesar's real name when she was signing the oath. "Don't tell me you know divine magic. Otherwise, why did you bring this guy here? He's dying. It's still early." Caesar put Orcash down. Although the orc's body was not as strong as the dragon's, it was still quite strong. If those idiots outside didn't throw Orcash under the hot sun, he would be able to hold on for a long time, even if he couldn't survive. If it was a heat stroke, he would have to cool down first. But he couldn't use frost breath directly. Now the orc's body was quite weak. Caesar was afraid that if a layer of frost fell, the sudden change in temperature would directly kill the orc. Caesar thought for a moment and cut off a large piece of ice from the rock that was used for refrigeration. Then he breathed out a flame. Although his control of his breath had not reached perfection, it was not far from it. He could achieve such a fine control. The broken ice melted under the heat of the fire and turned into liquid that flowed into the claws. Then Kathleen drenched Old Cash. Sure enough, seeing the orc's painful expression relax, he was more and more sure that this was not a Balrog's curse. It was just a normal heat stroke. Go and scoop some of that stuff we drank and feed it to him, Caesar ordered little Luna, and then used his tail to open Orcash's mouth. Sometimes it was troublesome to have sharp claws and teeth. They could easily tear apart fragile objects, such as the skin around the orc's face. So he could only use his tail to open the unconscious orc's mouth. Oh. Although she did not understand what Caesar meant, Luna still obediently held a bigger bowl and scooped a bowl of her favorite drink from the stone pot. Caesar remembered that there was peppermint in the medicine used to treat heat stroke in his previous life. Although the peppermint in Iradia was quite different from the peppermint on Earth, the taste was still the same. Maybe it could have the same effect. Hopefully. Caesar helped Orcash up a little. Luna flapped her wings and flew above the orc's head. Then she hung in the air and poured the whole bowl of liquid grass into the orc's mouth. Cough, cough. Although he choked a lot, Caesar saw that most of the drink still went into the orc's throat. Now let's pray to the gods. Caesar smiled and let go of Orcash. He lay down and put his neck flat on the ground, quietly observing the orc's changes. He did not have the habit of believing in gods. He was just joking. However, Luna really closed her eyes, crossed her fingers in front of her chest, and murmured something. He did not know what she was praying for. Chapter 27. Perhaps it was because of his orc physique, the medicine's effect was too good, or maybe it was because of Luna's prayer, but Orgash recovered very quickly. Not long after he woke up, he could walk on the ground. Other than feeling weak and a little dizzy, there were basically no major problems. This was simply a miracle to the orcs. Since the beginning of the Stone Crow clan, they had been struggling in this wilderness. In the orcs' memories, countless orcs had lost their lives to the Balrog's curse. Only warriors with incomparably strong wills could survive. And in the records of the Stone Crow clan, there were only a few of such warriors. If Caesar could read their thoughts, he would probably laugh like a pig. Why don't you try exposing a severely heat-stroke patient to the scorching sun? The temperature in the northern part of Iradia could reach up to 50 degrees during the dry season. It was really a blessing from the gods to be able to survive under such conditions. Although they did not know how Caesar saved Orgish, it did not stop the orcs from being grateful to the Black Dragon. Originally, they had to work hard every day to hunt 4 corn bulls for the Black Dragon. Even if the Stone Crow clan always kept their promises, they would still feel a little uncomfortable in their hearts. But now, this feeling was swept away. The orcs did not become more attentive, and Caesar did not receive any gratitude from anyone. But ever since then, every orc would subconsciously stop what they were doing when they saw the Black Dragon. They would puff out their chests and look at the Black Dragon as he gently pounded his chest with his right fist. That was enough. The orcs were not a race that was good at flattery like the gnomes and kobolds. Most of them were not good with words and did not express their emotions strongly. This action was enough to show their respect for Caesar. But at this time, Caesar did not have the time to think about this because he had other things to do. He was busy studying the plant that he named summergrass. At that time, Caesar picked this plant purely because he was greedy and liked to chew a few pieces. After boiling and chilling it, he found that it tasted good. Plus, Luna liked it very much, so he left a lot of it in the nest. Feeding it to Old Cash was just a temporary idea, with a meaningless attitude, but the result was unexpectedly so outstanding that even Caesar, who was the initiator of the experiment, was amazed. After that, he immediately realized that this might be a potential opportunity for Caesar to complete the primitive accumulation of capital. But the problem was that he had to confirm that Orgish woke up because of the effect of the summer grass, and not because of the orc's physique and Luna's prayer. Also, if the summer grass had an outstanding effect on the orcs, would it have the same effect on Caesar's target? He needed confirmation. Caesar immediately thought of contacting the leader of the orcs, Save. Due to the time he spent studying spells, Caesar was already quite familiar with the old man. Moreover, the relationship between the Black Dragon and the Stone Crow clan was no longer the same as before. Therefore, there was no need for Caesar to be courteous. After arriving at the cave where the old sorcerer lived, Caesar went straight in without saying a word. The flame flickered. Save was squatting on a stone block with a solemn face. His sparse brown hair drooped on top of his head. His robe was stained with a layer of dust. He was holding an old roll of sheepskin and reading something. "Hello, Caesar." Seeing that the light at the entrance of the cave was completely blocked, Save turned his head and stood up. He squeezed out a smile full of wrinkles at the Black Dragon, who climbed in. "I represent the Stone Crow clan to express our gratitude to you." "Thank you. I'm not here to receive compliments." Caesar lowered his head and looked at the old orc who was slightly hunched. Under Save's inquisitive gaze, he said in a low voice, "The Stone Crow clan's fate should not be like this." In fact, the orcs reproduced very quickly. However, the Stone Crow clan was never able to reach a large scale. The reason was that they were too poor. Their limited food could not support the growth of more orc children. Without an endless supply of warriors, they could not increase their numbers and plunder more resources. This was obviously a vicious cycle. However, the Stone Crow clan seemed to be unable to walk out of it. Caesar knew that there might be other reasons for the Stone Crow clan's predicament. However, the crux of the problem was the lack of resources. Resources were not only limited to food. They also included weapons, water, territory, population, and many other aspects. In the wilderness, every problem could drag the Stone Crow clan into a quagmire. It was like a huge mountain pressing down on them. Caesar could see that the old man Save was different from other orcs. He was more flexible and more intelligent than ordinary orcs. He might have thought of leading the Stone Crow clan to rise up. However, what could Save do with these orcs? It was nothing more than plundering like their ancestors. However, in the vast wilderness, although the orcs had eyes, they were no different from blind people. Without the support of intelligence, their efficiency was very low. Apart from that, these orcs must have encountered some kind of robbery. However, their loot could only be stored in their own territory and wait to rot. They had no way to exchange for the resources they needed. They also had to face the extermination of the human army. The situation was too small. Save was already the limit of this old wizard to keep the Stone Crow clan from being annexed by other forces. Caesar thought. Without waiting for the wizard to speak, he threw a plant that looked like weeds in front of Save. "What's this?" The old wizard's wrinkles deepened. He had seen this type of grass before. However, just like what Luna said, in Iradia, no one would spend time and effort to study plants that could not fill their stomachs and were not dangerous. Therefore, even if he had seen this type of plant before, he could not guess what Caesar wanted to do with it. "Boil this thing into water. It can remove the Balrog's curse," Caesar said. He did not want to waste time explaining the disease to Save. He chose to tell the orc leader in a way that the wizards could understand. "Impossible." The old wizard denied as expected. He refused to believe the Black Dragon's words. "Curses can only be removed by magic. I've never heard of using plants to remove curses. No one has ever tried it either." Caesar then added, "Otherwise, how do you think Orcash survived? Did he rely on himself? The Stone Crow clan is really blessed by the gods." The old orc was silent for a moment. He seemed to be wondering if the Black Dragon was deliberately making fun of him. It was said that the Black Dragon's close relative, the Red Copper Dragon, liked to do this. They lived in the joy of pranking people all day long. However, the Black Dragon would not do that, and Caesar would not do that either. Save thought about it. He raised his head and looked at the young dragon in front of him. "You're right. No one has ever tried it." He picked up the grass on the ground and handed it back to Caesar. "But this is yours. What do you want to do with it?" Caesar narrowed his eyes. "I've said it before. The fate of the Stone Crow clan should not be like this. Chapter 28. After entering the Tulu Basin, the deeper they went, the more desolate the environment became. Because of the terrain, this place was as hot as a furnace, and the air was slightly distorted. There was no vegetation on the surface, and the uninhabited mountain path passed through jagged, sharp stones. Only withered grass and dry trees grew out of the cracks in the rock walls. Surrounded by steep cliffs, the entrance to the basin was extremely narrow and only allowed 2 people to walk side by side. From a strategic point of view, this place was quite suitable for building a fortress. It was easy to defend and difficult to attack. "Walk faster, slave!" A loud shout came from behind. Gore only felt flustered from the heat, and his legs were so sore that he could barely walk. He was an adventurer of the northern countries, a mercenary, and of course, sometimes a bandit. He and his companions saw the mission issued by Lion Duchy and were prepared to come to the south to try their luck. However, they were caught on the way and had not eaten anything until now. They were driven here without rest. Perhaps only the gods in the heavens knew when the end would come. F***CK, Gore murmured. Gore murmured as he looked at his companions who were kidnapped with him. He struggled to take 2 steps forward. These orcs deserve to die. It took them a day to pass through the Mostel Grand Canyon and reach the wilderness. Seeing that the sky was dark, they prepared to rest for the night near a water source. However, the moment they closed their eyes, they were surrounded by orcs with stone weapons. Ordinary warriors were naturally weaker when facing orcs, and there was a great warrior among them. So these bandits did not spend much effort to catch them, and rushed here without saying a word. "My lord, I think you must have made a mistake." Gore turned his head and forced a smile, thinking that it must be ugly in the eyes of his companions. "I have nothing to do with orcs in my life. I swear on my honor, shut up." The orcs behind did not react at all, and only their lower bodies were wrapped in tattered fur. "Walk faster. F***CK, this pile of barbaric dog shit." Gore cursed in his heart. He raised his voice, trying to hide the trembling in his voice. "We are the people of Duke Pelosi Leon of the northern countries, and we are under the protection of Lion Duchy." Orcs were also an intelligent race. Perhaps the name of the northern countries would make them afraid, but this was the only way. Trying to break out of the encirclement was tantamount to digging one's own grave. The pitiful orcs who could no longer speak told Gore what would happen if he resisted. Bang! He was kicked to the ground by an orc and then pulled up by his hair. "Go!" Gore stopped talking. These orcs were exactly as the old mercenaries had said. They were as smelly and hard as stones in a latrine pit. They would only say those few words. Perhaps only the gods knew where they were taking him. However, as his emotions stabilized, Gore also felt at ease. Since the orcs did not kill everyone on the spot and rob them of their belongings, it meant that they definitely had other motives. Perhaps they just wanted to kidnap them to exchange for a sum of money. Most orcs like to do that. Fortunately, he had a few friends in Lion Duchy who should be able to afford the ransom. But Gore was not sure if he could hold on until then. The damn weather was getting hotter and hotter, so much so that he was drenched in sweat and even felt dizzy. Just as Gore was begging the gods for salvation, the orcs had also reached their destination. They did not rush them forward, but stood where they were, waiting silently. What did they want to do? Gore looked back at the orcs, standing still. The sun made the muscles on their chests and shoulders shine. He felt that his throat was about to burn, and he asked for water with a hoarse voice. "Sir, please." A strong wind blew, and a shadow covered him. The whistling wind made Gore feel cool, and the shadow that blocked the sunlight was precious. He looked back, wanting to see what gave the pitiful orcs a trace of pity in their desperation. Then, Gore fell in a deep shock. It was a terrifying beast that was completely black. There were 4 sharp horns on its head, and its fangs protruded out of its mouth. Its body was covered with jagged thorns that had a metallic texture. Its huge wings gradually folded in Gore's sight, and its thick and powerful tail drooped behind it. It was staring at the mercenaries who were pressed to the ground by the orcs, and its vertical yellow, jade-like pupils sent chills down their spines. This is a dragon? Gore was dumbfounded. It did not look much different from the black dragon. But where did such a strong black dragon come from? It was even more powerful than the red dragon. He found that his companions were as shocked as he was. There was such a huge and strange black dragon in the wilderness, and no one knew about it. There was no news about this dragon in the northern countries. Did those adventurers and army scouts grow up eating shit? A bunch of trash. Gore first cursed in his heart, then immediately became restless. No wonder these orcs wanted to bring them here. Could it be that they wanted to feed them to the black dragon? Just as Gore was thinking about how he could escape, he heard the black dragon speak. Humans? Where did you catch them? The border area. They're all mercenaries. Very good. The black dragon spoke with the orc who was escorting them. The conversation was very short, ending with no more than 20 words. Gore saw the black dragon nod and walk to the side. Wait, that's it? What did these evil races want? Gore did not understand. He looked at the silent black dragon and wanted to beg for mercy, but he could not speak. He wanted to shout, but his voice was suppressed in his throat. After that, the black dragon and the orcs did not do anything. They just looked at them quietly, watching and waiting. The silent fear kept eroding Gore's rationality, making him want to die immediately. As time passed, the sun became brighter and brighter, and the temperature rose. The bright sunlight was so blinding that he could not open his eyes. Gore felt his whole body aching. He was sweating, and his light armor was very sticky. He started to see double. After some time, Gore felt like he had returned to the northern countries. He saw the huge statue in the center of the capital of Lion Duchy and the nobles' carriages speeding past him. Enough. He could vaguely hear the black dragon's commanding voice. Try that. Try what? Gore felt someone pinch his mouth and force it open. The hard stone bowl hurt his teeth, and the next moment, a sweet liquid was poured into his throat. Was it water? His withered body was moisturized again, and his organs seemed to have been replenished. 15 minutes later, Gore woke up from the illusion, and the thirst was not so strong. His eyes found focus again, and he found a few orcs standing beside him. His kidnapped companions were kneeling with him. Gore subconsciously licked his lips. He did not know if it was an illusion, but the orcs gave him honey in the middle of summer. It was cool with a faint sweetness, and it was very memorable. It's useful. He heard the black dragon say, "That's enough. Get rid of them." Before Gore could express his gratitude, he heard the last voice in his life. Chapter 29. If they wanted to develop, they could rely on their strong reproductive ability to replenish their population. If their territory was too small, they could expand outwards. If the climate was not suitable, they could migrate. However, without the support of resources, all of these were just empty talk. If they could not even fill their stomachs and keep warm, how could they develop? Save had always wanted to solve this problem, but unfortunately, he could not do it. The problem of resources could not be solved with power alone. The Stone Crow clan was limited by their limited vision and structure. Even this wizard could not do anything about it. However, Caesar had given the Stone Crow clan a new hope. There were huge benefits hidden in the summer grass. It was hard to imagine what kind of uproar this plant, which could dispel the so-called Balrog's curse, would cause if it was released to the outside world. Moreover, the taste of the summer grass was very good. Even if it was only sold as a new drink in Iradia, it would still be a success. Caesar already had a complete plan in his mind. However, before he could implement it, he still needed to make some arrangements. Once this plant, which overturned Iradia's knowledge, was released to the public, it would easily attract the attention of those who wanted to study it. Iradia's territory was vast, and there were many species. There would definitely be people who could identify the raw material of the summer grass through its taste. When that time came, the Stone Crow clan's interests would be greatly damaged. Therefore, the summer grass needed to be packaged and various fruits and spices added to change its taste. It was also because of this that the humans were killed. They had tasted the original version of the summer grass. Once the news of this was leaked, the Stone Crow clan's previous efforts would be in vain. Caesar would not allow such a thing to happen. In fact, If Luna had not confirmed that there was no magic flowing through the roots and leaves of the summer grass, Caesar would have suspected that it was a magic plant. This was because the summer grass was very effective. Even after a large amount of dilution, its effect would not be affected. This was not in line with his knowledge of medicine in his previous life. Caesar realized that while he was changing the minds of the orcs, Iradia was also changing him. Let's not talk about that for now. However, even if they diluted and adjusted the packaging, it would only prolong the time that the summer grass was discovered. Once the benefits of this thing were so great that it could not be ignored, the mages would definitely take action and use spells to analyze its original structure to find the true element that could dispel the Balrog's curse. That was enough. Caesar did not intend to live off the summer grass for the rest of his life. He only wanted to earn a quick sum of money, complete the primitive accumulation of capital, and open up some channels. The orcs were a little slow, but they were still able to complete simple tasks like picking wild fruits. 4 days later, the 10 barrels of summer grass that had been tested were all sealed in boxes. Speaking of which, the most difficult part of their job was actually making these wooden barrels. For these clumsy fellows, making wooden barrels was a really delicate job. In the end, they had no choice but to force the old wizard's save to do it. Luna laughed while holding her stomach. Now that everything was ready, it was time to do business. Logically speaking, with Count Roy's status as the second son, how could he be reduced to a lowly merchant from the north? The Brindle family would not allow him to do so no matter what. But in fact, this was Roy's own idea, and it was supported by Count Brindle. When he was young, Roy used to be proud of the Brindle family's name, and thought that his father was the most amazing man in all of Iradia. Count Brindle had a vast territory called Khaki. He ruled over tens of thousands of people, built spell towers in his castle, and formed an army. This allowed Khaki's military power to reach its peak, and he could summon the wind and summon the rain. But as he grew older, Roy found that even the great and outstanding man in his heart had to bow and scrape in front of Duke Lionheart. He could not sleep at night because of a careless glance or word from Lionheart, and this made Roy feel ashamed from the bottom of his heart. What made him even angrier was that their army, the soldiers that his father was responsible for, shouted for the glory of the Lion Kingdom, and for the Duke when they went to the battlefield, while the knights who grew up in Khaki swore their oaths and called out Duke Lionheart's name. Roy refused to accept it. His brother was the first in line to inherit Count Brindle's throne, and he was usually careful and conservative. It could be said that he was an old nobleman who was cautious and low-key. Roy could not bear to see his brother like this, and his head was filled with bold ideas and ambitions. However, they were still brothers who had grown up together under the Count's wings. Roy naturally would not do anything out of line to his elder brother. He did not want to get his hands on his elder brother's things. He plunged headfirst into the monster Grand Canyon and the wilderness beyond. In fact, the merchant's business was just a cover to deceive others. All these years, Roy had been traversing the wilderness, and what he was really doing was slowly subduing the countless races in the wilderness. Regardless of whether they were evil or good, humanoid or beast-like, Roy said that he would not reject them. As long as they could form an effective fighting force, they would be his target. The Brindle family's power and wealth gave him enough support, and allowed Roy to have enough strength to travel in the wilderness, and allowed Roy to have enough money to buy over one clan after another. "My lord, are you really going to take a detour there to take a look? I'm afraid that this will delay our journey a lot." His trusted aide behind him urged his horse to catch up and whispered in his ear, "Delay our journey? Ha! If it's possible, I would rather never go to that place filled with poisonous gas." Roy took off his gloves and touched the cold pendant on his neck. The temperature in the wilderness was so high that it could drive people crazy. After that last time, the Stone Crow clan can no longer hold on. If I squeeze them dry 2 more times, these beast men will be kneeling on the ground and begging for my help. Compared to that damn green dragon. My lord. Hearing Roy mention the green dragon, his trusted aide could not help but tremble. He subconsciously looked back at the caravan that was still following behind them. "They don't know, don't worry." Roy patted the loyal aide's shoulder and comforted him. These fat pigs won't have a chance to speak. The people from the green capital will take over midway. The aide nodded, but there was no harm in being careful. They were taking on a dangerous task, and if they gave themselves away, everyone would be in trouble. Even Count Brindle's head would be separated from his body. Who would have thought that the great noble of the Lion Duchy in the north, Count Brindle, was secretly supporting the Green Dragon, using the Khaki Territory's power to provide resources and information to the Green Dragon Sylvia? The aide could not help but sweat every time he thought about it. But you're right. He heard Roy say, "Let these fat pigs be captured by the devils. They're too slow, and we can't afford to waste too much time. Go call Anrian and bring half of the cavalry with me. We'll go take a look at the Stone Crow clan first." Roy cursed a few more times before he spurred his horse forward and galloped along the narrow and rugged path. Behind him, there was the sound of an aide issuing orders. The cavalry quickly chased after them. Chapter 30. You said you found a gold mine? Roy asked hesitantly. Although the orcs were not good at lying, he still had doubts about their words. When the northern countries were at their peak, they'd spent a large sum of money to invite a golden dragon to patrol this area. Dragons were not only the authority in appraising treasures, but also masters in prospecting for minerals. Back then, the golden dragon had determined that the soil in this area was extremely barren and had no development value. The kind golden dragon had no reason to lie and could not deceive the northern countries. How could the orcs find a gold mine in this area? Where is it? Roy asked, his eyes full of scrutiny. How did you find the gold mine, and why did you think of informing me? That thing is useless to us. The one who spoke was Urgash. This guy shook his head and said in a righteous voice, "Give the orcs food, and the orcs will take you to find the gold." A few stupid pigs. Roy cursed in his heart, but in his heart, he believed Urgash a little. The orcs did not seem to be lying. Maybe they could really give him a surprise. So Roy smiled and said, "Okay, I promise you, my friend. My caravan is behind, and when they arrive, someone will naturally give you the food. Now, take me to see what you found." Urgash tilted his body and looked past Roy, as if searching for traces of the caravan, but his eyes seemed to inadvertently sweep past the priest Anrian who was riding on the horse. The orc withdrew his gaze and then refused. "No, food first, then gold. I say, buddy." Roy was so angry that he laughed and looked up and down at the ugly green-skinned creature. "We are already old friends. Shouldn't friends trust each other? I have never lied to you." "Yes." Unexpectedly, Urgash answered very seriously and interrupted him. "The words of humans cannot be trusted." Roy choked, and anger rose in his heart. He was a human noble, the second in line to Count Brindle's throne, and he was bargaining with a lowly orc here. "Orc." Roy's eyes turned cold. "I don't want our most sincere friendship to have a crack because of this. Please don't use such an unreasonable reason to make things difficult for your friend." As if sensing the threat in Roy's eyes, Urgash turned around to ask for the opinion of the hunting leader, Gaul. However, his eyes once again glanced at Priest Anrian's position. Then, with his back facing Roy, he nodded his chin slightly towards Gaul. That person left. Gaul strode forward and pushed Urgash aside. "Get out of the way, you idiot." Then he walked up to Roy and said in a low, muffled voice, "I'll take you there." "That's right." Roy clapped his hands and made a please gesture with noble etiquette. Gaul turned around and led 7 or 8 orcs toward the south. Roy was about to follow him when he heard a cavalryman hurriedly running up to him. "Sir, Lord Anrian went in that direction." The rider pointed in the opposite direction of Gaul and the orcs. "When? Who allowed him to leave without permission?" Roy's face instantly darkened. "Just now, Lord Anrian said not to worry about him and didn't allow us to follow him. He rode his horse in that direction alone." Looking at Roy's sour expression, the cavalryman bowed and reported carefully, "This guy is getting more and more unruly." Roy cursed. Anrian was Count Brindle's adopted son, a brother who grew up with him. Although there was no possibility of him being bribed to leak the secret, it still made him unhappy. After staring in the direction where Anrian disappeared for a while and glancing at the orcs who stopped and waited, Roy mounted his horse. "Forget it. Let's go with the orcs first. When that guy comes back, I'll teach him a lesson." Anrian galloped wildly on his horse, staring at the fleeing creature in front of him. He couldn't hide the joy on his face. Surprise suddenly came, and he was surrounded by a huge sense of happiness. He couldn't help but feel a little dizzy. He was Count Brendel's adopted son. At the age of 12, he began to study magic according to the Count's wishes. Later, he changed to the divine arts according to the Count's wishes and became a priest. Later, he was arranged to be by Roy Brendel's side, following the Count's son until now. Anrian hadn't had such strong emotions in a long time. Ever since he was forced to become a priest, the world in his eyes had turned gray. Count Brendel never treated him as his own child, just like how Roy never treated him as a brother. He was just an item that they needed, a component. Anrian had no interest in Roy's strange ambition, nor did he feel anything about the alliance between the Brendel family and the Green Dragon. This was not the life that Anrian wanted, but he had no choice. He had to be absolutely loyal to the Brendel family and try his best to repay the Count's kindness for 10 years. He became a numb person, following the Count's wishes step by step, without freedom, without hope, like an undead controlled by a necromancer. But today, everything was different. Perhaps his prayers day and night had moved the gods, allowing the compassionate gods to see this poor child. Guess what he saw around the Stone Crow clan? A forest sprite. Oh gods, what did a forest fairy mean to a spellcaster? It meant a continuous buff spell that allowed you to have foresight, allowing anyone to have the upper hand in a battle against a mage. In Iradia, where mages dominated, a forest fairy's temptation to people was no less than a dragon's treasure. Most importantly, forest fairies were relatively pure, kind, and loyal creatures. If one could capture them and spend some time with them, as long as the master didn't eat too badly, they would usually be able to capture the loyalty of the forest fairies. Moreover, this race was a rare species of wisdom. If there were no accidents, they could basically accompany their master for life. Anrian had read all this in the Brendel family's library, but this race was relatively rare now. He had only memorized this knowledge with a curious mind. Anrian would never have thought that he would actually find a forest fairy in this place. The moment he found it, Anrian subconsciously looked at the expressions of the people around him. After confirming that no one else had noticed, he couldn't care anymore. He didn't even bother to greet Roy and just chased after it. Anrian's desire for forest fairies was stronger than other spellcasters. He needed the little guy in front of him too much. Not only did he need a secret treasure that allowed him to foresee the future, he also needed a reliable companion that he could confide in and a loyal servant that could motivate him at any time. He had to catch it. It was getting closer, even closer. Arcane missile. Priests were also spellcasters. This profession wasn't as powerless as people thought. They could also cast a lot of very destructive spells, and in battle, they weren't much weaker than spellcasters of the same level. Arcane missile, tracking, illumination, and arcane missile were known as the mage's 3 treasured spells. It was the first basic spell that every mage's apprentice would come into contact with. Although it was only at the beginner level, Anrian was already quite familiar with it, and its power was also not bad. At least it was more than enough to deal with the forest fairies who had low combat ability. As long as he could hit it, he could knock it to the ground. However, the little guy in front of him had sharp senses and fast reactions. As soon as he raised his hand, the forest fairies had already sensed it and continued to flee forward. Chapter 31. The road was getting more and more difficult to travel. It was rugged, steep, and narrow, and it was difficult to travel on horseback. Therefore, Anrian simply dismounted, held the staff in one hand, and cast a wind incarnation for himself. Then, he quickly chased after the elf. Many people would subconsciously think that spellcasters were weak, thinking that mages were the kind of people who would pant after taking 2 steps. This was actually a misconception. Spellcasters' bodies were not weak. They were constantly being nourished by magic. In this case, even if they did not reach the level of a warrior, they were still much better than ordinary people. So Anrian's running speed was not slow, and with the buff spell, he was even faster than the forest fairy. The distance between the two was gradually closing. Please slow down, child. I'm a priest, blessed by God. I will never hurt you. Anrian chased, while calling out in Iradia's common language to ensure that the other party could understand. The forest fairy in front turned its head to look at him, its little face a bit uneasy and nervous. But in the end, it said nothing and quickly turned back to continue running. This fleeting turn of its head allowed Anrian to see its face clearly. It was a female forest fairy. It should be known that the market value of a female forest fairy was 10 times that of a male. They were as adorable as pocket-sized angels, and the moment they appeared, they would be fought over by the nobles. They would then be hidden away and kept in captivity like canaries. Anrian was glad that he did not inform the other riders and chased out alone. Once Roy and Brindle knew that he had a female forest fairy in his hands, he was afraid that he would have to hand it over no matter what. There was no way he could keep it. At the same time, looking at the nimble and beautiful little fellow in front of him, Anrian could not help but secretly feel a hint of joy. The distance closed again. Child, as a child of the forest, you shouldn't stay in this barbaric wasteland. Come with me. I'll take you to the civilized world. I'm sure the people there will like you very much. Although he was a bit out of breath from running for a long time, Anrian resisted the urge to call out again. He had made up his mind that today, even if he had to chase a monster in the south or the green capital in the north, he would catch this little fellow in his hands. Arcane Missile. Anrian cast another spell, wanted to seal off the forest fairy's escape route. He indeed had the ability to cast a spell with even greater destructive power, but he had to be careful and didn't dare to do so. If he accidentally killed the fragile forest fairy, then Anrian would definitely regret it. The losses outweighed the gains. It had to be said that he was indeed a very talented spellcaster. At the very least, even the most picky and strict archmage would not be able to find fault with his arcane missile. 3 missiles wrapped in magic power were fired in a row, all of which hit the forest fairy's surroundings, completely sealing off the target's path. The forest fairy stopped. Child, I assure you that I mean you no harm. Anrian quickly caught up with him. His gray hair was stuck together and stained with sweat. He didn't look good, but he still tried to show a sincere smile. The forest fairy's expression was timid, but she didn't seem to be particularly afraid. Seeing Anrian approach, she flapped her 4 transparent wings again and hid behind a fiery mane bear that appeared out of nowhere. Fiery mane. Anrian's smile widened, not hiding the joy in his heart. Child, you must know that in this dangerous wilderness, fiery mane can hardly provide you with enough protection. Fiery mane bears were a species of mammal widely distributed in the northern region of Iradia. They got their name because they liked hot climates. They were distant cousins of the brown bear, but they were slightly larger than the brown bear. Their body length was generally between 3 to 4 meters. However, the one in front of him was estimated to be close to 4 meters long. It was one of the few big ones among the fiery mane bears. Unfortunately, they weren't magical creatures. Perhaps they were a fatal threat to ordinary people, but for a spellcaster with combat experience, fiery mane bears were nothing. I understand, child. You were threatened by this damned fiery mane bear, right? Anrian continued to approach. With a wave of his hand, he shook off the grass, leaves, and mud on his robe. I'm coming to help you. He took another 2 steps forward, then suddenly stopped. No, something was wrong. Fiery mane bears were not docile beasts. Under normal circumstances, they would quickly go berserk after sensing danger. They would roar, show their claws and teeth, and might even attack directly. Anrian didn't think that the fiery mane bear couldn't sense his threat, but it didn't do anything. He wouldn't be surprised if the fiery mane bear attacked or ran away. However, the beast in front of him was too quiet. It just lay there, motionless. No, not motionless. Upon closer inspection, this fiery mane bear seemed to be trembling. What's going on? Anrian instantly became alert. He didn't think that he had the ability to make a fiery mane bear tremble, but at the same time, he didn't feel any strange magic waves. Damn it, what's coming? Gusts of wind rustled through the forest. In the north, even the wind carried heat with it. However, all Anrian felt was cold. His grayish-white mage robe trembled behind him as if it had a life of its own. Anrian clenched the staff in his hand. It was a magic item that had been enchanted with magic. Roy was not stingy with the only priest in the team. The staff was inlaid with jewels and shone brightly. The sunlight reflected off the shiny metal staff and shone brightly. Anrian felt it from his spellcaster's intuition. In the 2 years he had been accompanying Roy through the wilderness, he had never been so scared. What was it? The forest sprite reappeared and flew past Anrian, landing somewhere behind him. In the back, Anrian quickly turned around. His heart stopped beating, and he didn't dare to breathe for a while. The sunlight shone on the ground, illuminating the source of his fear. It was a huge beast with a body length of 10 meters. It was like a small mountain lying in the middle of the forest. Its bright yellow eyes stared straight at him, like a snake staring at a small bird. Anrian seemed to have suddenly lost the ability to speak. He tried to find the right words, but it was in vain. How could this be? How could a black dragon appear in this unbearably hot wilderness? Logically speaking, this should be the climate that the black dragon hated the most. Even if he suddenly saw a green dragon or a red dragon, Anrian wouldn't feel so shocked, as if he was in a dream. Right after that, Anrian saw the forest fairy gently land between the black dragon's thorns and heard her say to the beast, spellcaster, priest, around the level of an intermediate mage. There shouldn't be a problem, right? Hearing this, Anrian felt the flames of anger surging in his chest, about to explode. Damn it! The forest sprite that he missed so much had become the servant of an ugly Penishade dragon. Unforgivable. Chapter 32. Anger could drive a person crazy, but at the same time, it could also give a person strength. Magic light filled Anrian's body, making him glow. Even his eyes were covered by a layer of white energy, and his pupils could not be seen. Caesar arched his body, all the muscles in his body ready to go. This was his first time facing a spellcaster, so he could not help but be more cautious. All the information he learned from the wizard's save came to mind. Anrian raised his staff. Attention! Arcane missiles cast continuously. Luna, who was serious, no longer had her usual silly look. Her crisp voice rang softly in his ears, like pearls falling on a jade plate. Almost at the same time, light bloomed at the tip of Anrian's staff. Arcane missiles. 9 missiles made purely of magic appeared, and with extreme speed and different trajectories, they swept towards the huge beast in the distance. Boom! Caesar leaped up, his folded wings slightly opened and trembled, giving him more lift. This nearly 10-meter-long black dragon rushed to a low altitude the humans could not reach, and then dived down at an even faster speed. Then, he stared at the spellcaster with frequent energy fluctuations below and opened his mouth. When Anrian saw the black dragon open his mouth, he knew what the opponent was going to do. Meditation and fighting against dragons was a compulsory course for every spellcaster. He subconsciously covered himself with a layer of barrier to block the black dragon's acid, and was ready to counterattack at any time. However, what came at him was not acid, but blazing flame streams. The hymn used to block the acid was instantly shattered by the flames. Before he could cast another spell, Anrian reacted quickly and rolled to the side, escaping in a sorry state. Then, his potential erupted, and with a spell casting speed that he usually could not reach, he once again erected a frost barrier in front of him, blocking the flames that followed him like a shadow. What's going on? Anrian had just struggled out from the edge of life and death, and immediately felt shocked and doubtful. What kind of black dragon was this? Its breath was actually the flames of the red dragon. This was simply appalling. However, no matter how horrified he was, Anrian was still a spellcaster nurtured by a major clan. It had to be said that this young man's qualities were quite good. He could still remain calm in the face of a phenomenon that defied common sense, and his casting did not stop for a moment. 1 second later, moonfire. The target is your heart. Luna's voice sounded again. Caesar shifted his body to dodge the incoming moonfire spell. It was no wonder that Anrian would chase after Luna like a flock of ducks. To them, the forest fairy was practically a mage killer. With such an abnormal support, dealing with a mage caster would be a piece of cake. Damn it! Seeing that his spell had been dodged in advance, Anrian didn't even need to guess to know that the forest fairy was helping the beast. This made him even more unable to accept it. That was a 5-colored evil dragon. Why would a child of the forest rather help it than enter the embrace of a god's chosen? Illuminate. Anrian raised his staff high and cast the Illuminate spell that was considered the most useless of the 3 secret spells. The emerald at the top of the staff began to emit a luster. It was a simple, effective spell. Luna judged that this spell would not pose any threat to Caesar, so she did not warn him. At this time, Caesar was already closing in on them at extremely fast speed. His heavy body stomped on the ground, causing the ground to tremble and rumble. The trees in front of him were all pushed down, trying to kill him on the ground. Looking at the black dragon charging straight at him, Anrian did not retreat a single step. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he began to infuse magic into his staff. The next moment, his staff became extremely dazzling, and the Illuminate spell was pushed to the extreme. Luna let out a low cry. She was forced to close her eyes, unable to look directly at such a strong light. Fortunately, this did not have any effect on dragons. However, Caesar was slightly surprised. He did not expect the humans in Iradia to be so smart as to think of using the Illuminate spell as a flash bomb. The black dragon was still charging forward. You still dare to come? Seeing that the black dragon was still not retreating without the help of the forest fairy, the smile on Anrian's face gradually widened. Spellcasters had another nickname in Iradia, which was cannons. Charging straight at a mage like this was no different from suicide. Foolish dragon. Seeing the beast charging forward, Anrian could not help but mock it. The hand that had been hanging down finally moved, outlining the most powerful spell model that he could cast at the moment. Without the forest fairy's early warning, how could a black dragon, who was at most a teenager, dare to charge at a spellcaster like this? Holy punishment! Countless magical lights exploded on Anrian's body. This was one of the few offensive spells that a priest could cast. Its power was quite astonishing, almost comparable to a mage's fireball spell. The lights quickly converged into a sphere and then whistled out. It was too fast. Luna had just opened her eyes and only had time to shout, "Be careful," before this damned holy light was already in front of her eyes. And from Anrian's perspective, the black dragon seemed to be charging at the holy light. We won. Anrian breathed a sigh of relief. This young black dragon was obviously inexperienced. It actually dared to charge at a mage in a straight line and at full speed. This was no different from charging straight at the muzzle of a gun. Being hit by a holy punishment, not to mention a teenager, even a young black dragon would not have an easy time. Seeing the approaching holy light, Luna subconsciously tilted her head and closed her eyes, not daring to continue watching. Anrian, on the other hand, did not even blink, preparing to witness the scene of the ugly dragon being seriously injured and dying. He was going to be disappointed. At the moment when the holy light was about to reach him, Caesar displayed an attribute of agility that was unheard of. Under his control, his powerful muscles resisted inertia with unparalleled strength, and in an instant, he changed direction and moved to the left, brushing past the dangerous holy light. How is this possible? One could not imagine how shocking the scene and the visual effect of a huge creature more than 10 meters long doing such a move was. Anrian was not a farmer from the countryside. He had seen dragons, and even dragons more powerful than Caesar. But there was absolutely no dragon that could do such a thing. No, not only dragons, but also any species of Iradia. This subverted Anrian's inherent understanding and made his brain go into a long-term stupor. What's going on today? Everything is different. The forest fairies, the black dragon, Am I dreaming? Caesar had already rushed in front of him, but Anrian gave up resisting. He was almost hysterical, his eyes empty as he muttered to himself, "No, this is impossible." However, the black dragon didn't have the mind to care about what the priest was thinking. A breath of frost descended upon the priest's body, freezing his dazed expression into a beautiful statue. He actually dodged it. Luna, who was still in shock, patted her chest, then quickly jumped up and ran around Caesar's head. "Amazing, Caesar. Tell me how you did it just now." Even I was shocked. Caesar shook his head and did not answer her. This was the first time he fought with a mage, and there were many mistakes that needed to be learned. Looking at the black dragon's appearance, Luna did not say anything. She already understood Caesar's character quite well. Although they could joke around and make fun of each other, when he was serious, it was best not to disturb him. 5 minutes later, Caesar finally came back to his senses. He stepped on the statue on the ground and turned it into ice shards. Then, he spat out flames to burn the area and destroy the corpse. Only then did he spread his wings. "Let's go. The orcs should be almost done." Chapter 33. Roy did not expect that the beastmen would bring him to the Dura Basin. "There's a gold mine in this damned place." He stared at the steep cliff at the entrance of the basin. Even though he knew that the beastmen would never lie, he could not help but have a strong suspicion in his heart. Suspicion made people cautious. Roy raised his hand and held the pendant engraved with his family's emblem on his neck, looking around from time to time. "We're here." The muscular orc suddenly stopped in his tracks, causing the knight behind him to stumble. "It's here," the orc said in a low, muffled voice. Gaul pointed to a corner of the Dura Basin. It was a man-made mine, and the entrance was wide. Dust and particles filled the air, and it was obvious that it had been dug not long ago. It was pitch black, and Brindle did not know how deep it went or what was inside. "Let's go." When their emotions were stable, the beastmen did not like to express themselves too much, and their words were always short. Gaul only said 2 words and took the lead to walk inside. Roy did not enter the mine immediately due to his cautious nature. Instead, he casually assigned 2 knights to follow the beastmen in to investigate while he waited outside for news. The knights obeyed and waited for about 10 minutes before they crawled out of the long, dark tunnel with sweat on their faces. "What's inside?" Roy asked when he saw that the beastmen were safe. The knight wiped off the sweat on his forehead and nodded. "There is indeed gold inside, but my lord—" "But what?" "This subordinate does not know how to search for ores, and I need my lord to personally take a look." The knight's expression was a little strange. "Idiot," Roy scolded, but he still chose to move. Under the knight's lead, he entered the cave with his head lowered and his waist bent as he crawled into the dark tunnel. The tunnel was not big and could only accommodate 2 people walking side by side. God knows why this place was even hotter than the outside. The knight leading the way came in for the second time, and his shirt was completely soaked. From Roy's angle, he could clearly see the sweat seeping out of his pores. These stupid orcs, could they have dug their way into the dark domain? Roy could not help but have this thought as he walked through the dark tunnel. Everyone knew that there were many spatial nodes in Iradia. Through the hidden nodes, one could connect to an underground space. That space was filled with savage and ferocious creatures. Of course, there were also many treasures. The people on the surface called it the Underdark. However, Roy quickly denied this idea. It was impossible for Knight to enter the Underdark without knowing. Knight was his confidant. If there was really danger, he would never let him come down. The tunnel was very dark, and time passed as he fumbled around. About 2 minutes later, they arrived at an open area that had been excavated. Roy heard his attendants say, "We're here, my lord." Roy Brindle looked around. This damned place was so dark that he could barely see anything. The only source of light was the fluorescent red soil around him, and the visibility was less than 2 centimeters. Enrin, that idiot. At this time, he could not help but think of the only priest in the group. Before he could curse again, Roy heard a rustling sound. A green-skinned hand poked in front of him. "Here, human gold." Roy saw that the hand was holding a handful of rocks, and there were a few granular golden objects in it. It was difficult to see in the darkness, so he held the orc's wrist. "Take me to the place where you dug it out." Then he was led a few steps forward by the orc, and then he squatted down. As the orc's so-called gold mine came into view, Roy's anger rose. There was indeed gold here, but the amount was pitifully small. It was sparsely dotted between the rocks and the red soil, and the size was not much different from bird droppings. "This is the gold mine you speak of." Roy was so angry that he laughed. If the amount of gold in this place was the same as what he saw, even if he sent people to turn the entire Tulu Basin upside down, the amount of gold that could be smelted would not be enough to last the Brindle family for a day. How can I believe their words? These damned orcs, how knowledgeable can they be? He stood up with a little annoyance, thinking that he should send a dwarf or gnome to take a look and be done with it. Roy did not have any hope. He wanted to go back, but he was pulled back by the orc. "There's more here." The orc seemed to see his dissatisfaction and pointed in another direction. Roy suppressed his anger and patiently followed them to take a look. The result was still unsatisfactory, making him greatly disappointed. When he stood up, he inadvertently noticed that the knights' faces were a little pale, and they were sweating profusely. They did not seem to be in good condition. "Is it too hot?" Roy subconsciously touched the pendant on his neck. This way, at this time, the orc pulled him again, wanting to lead him to another corner. Enough. Roy had endured until now because of his family's upbringing, but he had completely lost his patience. He waved his hand and interrupted the orc's words. "I already know. In 2 days, I will send a mine explorer over, and the first few bags of food will be given to you. Now we have to leave." Roy turned around and ordered the knight who led him down. "Let's go." The knights were relieved, and they did not care about the orc's reaction. They gathered around Roy and quickly began to return. In the darkness that they did not notice, the orcs were still standing in the same place, looking at each other with their red pupils. "It's about time. The Balrog's curse will descend at the same time as the last experiment." Orcash mouthed to the Gaul. The orcs nodded to each other and did not say a word as they chased after Roy, who left first. It was noon when they walked out of the mine, and the sun was so vicious that it made them dizzy. Roy's impression of the orcs dropped to the freezing point. "These bastards are as stupid as pigs." Asterisk bang. Asterisk the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground rang in front of them. Roy heard the sound and subconsciously looked up, only to see the leader of the orcs lying flat on the ground. His eyes were closed, and his forehead was covered in sweat. The others quickly went forward to check. One of them knelt down and wiped the sweat off the orc's face. They were all experienced warriors and quickly knew what the problem was. He looked up and said in a low voice, "It's the Balrog's curse, my lord. The Balrog's curse." Roy gritted his teeth and repeated. He was very familiar with this thing. In the northern countries, many poor people were easily killed by this curse. Every year during the dry season, the priests in the churches were so busy that they could not stop. At this time, he noticed that the other orcs' faces were also pale, and sweat kept dripping down. This was a sign that the Balrog's curse was about to invade. "That damn bastard, where did he go?" Roy cursed Anrian 10,000 times as hard. "My lord, you have to leave this." Not long after, another orc fell unconscious. At the same time, a few orcs with green skin walked out of the cave. After the second, the third, the fourth. Not long after, all the orcs that Roy brought with him lost their strength and fell unconscious on the ground. Roy leaned against the wall and slowly sat down, as if he was also affected by the curse and lost his ability to move. Chapter 34. It's the Balrog's Curse. The voices of the orcs were rough and hoarse, like the sound of tree bark rubbing against each other. As they spoke, they approached the fallen humans. Roy's eyes seemed to be closed, but upon closer inspection, there was still a small gap. He leaned against the wall and sat down, observing the orcs' every move. The pendant he wore around his neck was actually a magic item, forged by the dwarves and enchanted by the hands of the great wizards of the northern countries. It could protect him from being affected by the curse. In fact, Roy's condition was not bad. In such a hot temperature, his body was still normal, and he did not even sweat much. However, this bad guy still pretended to be in trouble. Firstly, he wanted to hide the magic item in his hand. Secondly, his intuition told Roy that the Balrog's curse was too coincidental. It was a little strange. He wanted to see what these orcs were going to do next and find the crux of the problem. What should we do? We don't have a priest to save them. He heard a few orcs discussing among themselves. For some reason, the voices of these green-skinned fellows suddenly became very loud, and every word seemed to be shouted out. The little ones are treacherous and cunning. I hate them, but we can't let them die in front of us. The orc commander Gaul's voice rumbled like thunder, and it was so loud that it hurt people's ears. Let them drink that. But the chief said that it's best not to reveal that to outsiders. Another orc called Orcash said. He seemed unwilling, and his words were stiff. Don't bother. These people won't remember anything when they wake up. Roy squinted and saw the commander rudely interrupting the opposition. In the rustling sound of fur rubbing against each other, the orcs took out a water bottle from under the cover of their fur and squatted beside the fallen humans to feed them. What was this? Roy was not too sure, but he was careful. When the orcs fed him the water, he did not swallow it directly, but kept it in his mouth. Although he knew that these fellows were unlikely to play tricks like poisoning, there was no harm in being careful. Fortunately, the orcs seemed to cherish the wine in the kettle very much. They were very frugal and only fed each of them 2 small sips. Otherwise, if they drank too much, their cheeks would bulge and they would not be able to hide it. After feeding all the people who had fallen to the ground one by one, he saw Orcash put away the kettle and put it back into the fur that he always wore. He even patted it and walked to the side again to wait quietly. The water was very sweet, and it carried a fruity fragrance and coolness. Roy couldn't help but want to swallow it. However, he still resisted because he couldn't be careless at a time like this. 15 minutes later, he heard a few soft moans. The few drops of fruit syrup fed by the orcs seemed to be filled with magical powers. The exhausted heart of the servant on the ground was reinvigorated, and his limbs were no longer stiff. They squeezed out a low groan from their throats, then slowly sat up and gradually regained their mobility. Although their bodies were still weak, they were finally out of their unconscious state. The curse has been lifted. Roy's nerves jumped. He was not a narrow-minded and short-sighted orc. He knew that there were indeed many ways to dispel the Balrog's curse in Eladia without relying on the dispelling spells of priests. However, those were all expensive and precious items or potions that were rich in magic. They were definitely not things that these orcs could get their hands on. What did the orcs give them to drink? Thinking of this, Roy finally swallowed the fruit syrup that was in his mouth into his stomach. It flowed down his throat and into his body as if it had a life of its own. It had a sweet aftertaste, and the cool air flowed through his limbs, soothing the fatigue in his body. He couldn't help but feel energized. "My lord, please forgive my incompetence." At this time, his servants forced their weak bodies to kneel in front of Roy. They lowered their heads in shame and begged for forgiveness. To the servants of the Brendel family, not being able to protect their master was the greatest sin. It was just a trip to the Duru Basin, and they couldn't hold on and fainted one by one. If the orcs had any evil intentions, wouldn't young Master Roy be like a sheep in a pack of tigers? If it was any other time, Roy would have fiercely reprimanded them, but he didn't have the mood to do so. His mind was spinning rapidly, thinking about other things. Traveling was not his main business, but after so many years of dealing with different races, Roy quickly realized that the fruit syrup that the orcs gave them contained great benefits. In the northern countries, other than magic potions and magical items that he rarely came into contact with, commoners and nobles had no other way to get rid of the Balrog's curse other than seeking help from a priest. This caused the churches in Khaki to be overcrowded every day during the dry season, and the number of farmers and stonemasons who died from the Balrog's curse was uncountable. But now, he found a strange wine in the Stone Crow clan that could directly dispel the curse. Moreover, even without mentioning the value of dispelling the curse. Just the unique taste alone would make it highly sought after in the northern countries. Investing in the green dragon was a long-term benefit. Before the green capital defeated the northern countries, the Brindle family's investment would not be repaid. Currently, Khaki was in a state of loss, and they had no choice but to use the method of tricking foreign merchants. But this was not a long-term plan. Roy needed to find a way to fill the gap in their funds. It was right in front of him. This was a treasure that could be excavated. Roy did not expect that the orcs would give him another surprise, even though they did not lead him to the real gold mine. Let's go, weak humans. This place seems to be very dangerous for you. The orcs were already pulling them away. Roy fell into deep thought. He had long forgotten about the gold mine and tried to recall every word that the orcs said, not missing a single detail. According to the information that the orcs unintentionally revealed during their conversation, the Stone Crow clan should have been brewing this fruity wine for a long time. It was just that they were restricted by their clan leader, who was a wizard and could not reveal it to outsiders. The clan leader? This was an unimaginable resource, and Roy's ambition did not allow him to miss this opportunity. Maybe I should talk to that old man. Save, the leader of the Stone Crow clan. Rather than saying that he did not want to interact with the human merchants, it was more accurate to say that Roy deliberately avoided this wizard. To be honest, he was quite wary of this old man. When he first entered the Stone Crow clan, he had asked Anrian about his strength. Anrian's eyes were uncertain and evasive, and he said that he could not make an accurate judgment. But looking at him now, Roy knew that this old man was definitely stronger than Anrian. There was an old wizard in the Stone Crow clan that he did not know the depth of. This was the real reason why Roy did not dare to do anything to this small tribe. If it was not for this old man, he would have used force to subdue this group of stupid orcs. If he wanted to negotiate with this old man, Roy had to think carefully. Chapter 35. You said that you want to work with us? Save looked at Roy Brindle, the leader of the merchant group who had dealt with the Stone Crow clan many times. He tapped his bone staff lightly with his long fingernails. You want to sell our fruit on behalf of the Stone Crow clan? As he spoke, he turned his gaze to Gaul, Orcash, and the others. Under the old leader's scrutinizing gaze, the orcs lowered their heads and looked at their chests, as if they had revealed the clan's greatest secret. Please forgive me for being presumptuous, elder. Roy bowed slightly. He had never spoken to the true leader of the Stone Crow clan face to face. Facing a spellcaster who might be an archmage, anyone should maintain their respect. You can't blame them. Your warriors are just too honest and did not want to see us tortured by the curse. He explained to the orcs who went to the Duru Basin with him, hoping to gain their favor. Lord Wizard, ever since the accident last time, I've been feeling very guilty. To be honest, I sympathize with your misfortune and hope that I can find a way to make up for my mistakes. Roy wiped away his non-existent tears and put on a sorrowful expression. But I am just an ordinary merchant. Other than praying to the gods day and night, what else can I do? But today, I have found a way to repay your kindness. His expression changed from sorrow to excitement. As long as you can sell your fruit to my merchant group, I, Roy Brindle, am willing to swear on my honor that I will bring you a large amount of wealth in the near future and improve the Stone Crow clan's current situation. The old leader did not reply. In fact, the person who spoke to Roy was not a wizard, but Caesar, who was far away in a mountain's nest. Save established a telepathic link with the Black Dragon and relayed Caesar's words to him. There was a moment of silence. During this time, Roy stared at the old orc's expression, trying to guess his thoughts. I cannot give you the recipe. This is a secret passed down from the Stone Crow clan since ancient times. The old orc said, "Seeker my ass." Roy cursed in his heart. Who knows if this damn orc clan has been in the wilderness for more than 200 years? Who knows if you stole the formula when you were serving some evil dragon as a family? And you still have the cheek to talk about secrets? You're even more hypocritical than humans. He did not expect that his random guess would be so close to the truth. Speaking of which, Roy also knew that it was not realistic to pry the fruit juice formula out of these orcs, and the hope was quite slim, so he did not pester them too much. He nodded slightly and said, "I understand. I respect the customs and taboos of the various clans. Although I am only an ordinary merchant, I still have many friends in the northern kingdoms. As long as you can sell your products to me, I believe that in the near future, tons of food will be delivered to the Stone Crow clan." Such a firm promise seemed to make old Orcsif feel a little relieved. He nodded and asked, "How much is it? How much profit?" Roy was stunned. Splitting was a rather fashionable business model in the northern countries. It generally only appeared in the economically developed South and sea trade. In the relatively backward northern countries, merchants usually sold goods for others, and they generally used the model of regular commissions. Originally, he thought that once the Stone Crow clan handed over the fruit to him, these stupid beastmen would have nothing to do with him. The beastmen would have no way of knowing what was going on in the market, and he could just hire a professional merchant to tell them whatever he wanted. By then, he could directly take all the profits. These dirty and stupid orcs were only fit to follow behind him and drink some soup. But he did not expect that the orcs, who were ignorant, would say the word profit-sharing. This old orc's wisdom and firmness were beyond his imagination. It caused his originally clear thoughts to be messed up, and he had to reconsider his plan. Roy fell into a short silence. However, he was still one of the heirs of a big clan. He quickly sorted out his thoughts. There is one thing that cannot be denied. The fruit is indeed brewed by the orcs. Soon, Roy had a plan in his mind. He said tentatively, "But please allow me to remind you that the transportation of the goods and the sales to the northern countries are all handled by me. Moreover, it is not easy to build a business channel from scratch. So, I hope that the profit will be divided into 3 parts. The Stone Crow clan will take 3 parts. Do you agree?" He finished his sentence in one breath. There were many obscure words that the orcs could not understand. His purpose was to confuse the old wizard and make him agree to his conditions. Unexpectedly, the old wizard did not care about what he said. He immediately shook his head and refused. "No, the Stone Crow clan will take 70%. How is that possible?" Roy seemed to be shocked. His face was full of shock. "My friend, please understand. I am only a merchant. It is not easy to sell foreign goods to the northern countries. The city guards and nobles are all vampires. I need at least 60%. 70% of the Stone Crow clan and 30% of the humans." The old orc was not moved. He insisted that he would not change his mind. "If you do not agree, you can cancel this cooperation." This showed the effect of Caesar's previous plan. If the Stone Crow clan took the initiative to ask the humans to sell the summer grass, they would definitely be suppressed. No matter how profitable the summer grass was, they would be exploited until only a layer of skin was left. In the end, he planned to let the caravan coincidentally discover the fruit juice brewed by the orcs. The orcs could not resist the temptation and took the initiative to ask for the Stone Crow clan's help. The humans were naturally at a disadvantage in negotiations. The orcs firmly held the upper hand. No matter how glib Roy's tongue was, as long as Caesar did not agree, he could not do anything. In the end, Roy could not resist the huge profits of the summer grass. He agreed to an agreement with the Stone Crow clan. The tribe would provide the fruit juice, and the caravan would be responsible for selling it to the northern countries. The profits would be divided 40 to 60, and the Stone Crow clan would take 60%. Then, please let us sign our names together under the witness of the God of Truth. The old orc's words extinguished Roy's last hope. He gritted his teeth. Considering that this was a business without any capital, even 40% was better than nothing. He reluctantly signed his name, Roy Brindle, on the contract. Chapter 36. The sun was scorching, but the forest was quiet, and there was an eerie atmosphere in the air. Roy bid farewell to the beastmen with a smile, but once he left the Stone Crow clan's territory, his expression turned gloomy. "Have you not found Amrian yet?" he asked. The riders and attendants looked at each other and shook their heads in unison. A bad premonition arose in his heart, but the journey to the green capital could not be delayed. This was an important matter that concerned the entire Brindle family, and he could not afford to delay it. He had already stayed in the beastman's territory for too long. K2s. Yes, sir. The tall rider replied with his chest puffed out. Take 10 men and search for Anrian in the wilderness. Roy pinched the family emblem on his chest and made a decision within a minute. Regardless of whether he's dead or alive, when we return from the green capital, I want to know the results. Understood, my lord. The rider immediately picked 10 men from the guards at the back. Vane. Yes, sir. A lean warrior stepped forward. You stay here as well. Keep a close eye on the Stone Crow clan's every move. These stupid beastmen suddenly became smart. I suspect that someone is behind this. Find him. Roy revealed a stern expression that he would only show in front of his trusted subordinates. Also, the fruit syrup was probably brewed recently. Take 2 teams and keep an eye on these beastmen. Find out what they're doing and what ingredients they're using. Yes, my lord. The rest of you, I'll give you 5 minutes to count the number of people in the caravan. Roy raised his head and glanced at everyone coldly. After 5 minutes, the rest of you will follow me. The Stone Crow clan, the Black Dragon's lair. Climbing such a high mountain was not an easy task, so when Old Cash ran in, his muscular chest was heaving up and down as he panted. We did it, Lord Ortolanso. Obviously, he was still not used to the honorifics that were commonly used in communication. The little guy agreed to our request. This idiot did not know that it was Caesar who was negotiating with Roy the whole time. He thought that Caesar did not know about it, so he excitedly ran up the mountain to deliver the news. Well done. The dragon in the darkness revealed itself and exhaled 2 long white breaths from its nose. You're all good. Caesar stretched out his forelimbs, wanting to pat Orcash on the shoulder to encourage him. However, when he looked at his sharp claws, he gave up the idea helplessly. However, his praise was sincere. Gaul and Olcash played an important role in this business. If it weren't for them, the Stone Crow clan would never have made such a high profit. To the honest beastmen, it was really difficult for them to put on this show. It was even more difficult to make the details so realistic that they didn't give themselves away. The beastmen in charge of this segment had obviously worked hard and practiced countless times in private. After being praised by the true dragon, Olcash scratched his bald head. His green face blushed, and he became shy. You arranged it well. In fact, there were many ways to make money. Most of the evil dragon's way of making money was through robbing. They could also make a lot of money in a short period of time by kidnapping and plundering. However, Caesar couldn't do anything that those evil dragons could do. At the very least, the only ones who would do something like that were the young dragons who had gradually become stronger. With Caesar's current situation, if he did something like that, he would only bring about his own destruction. From a safe point of view, the most ideal and suitable way for him to develop his business was through trade. He would be the hidden mastermind behind the scenes. First, he would rely on the summer grass to make a huge profit. Then, he would snowball his strength and establish his foundation. This was the foundation that Caesar had set long ago. In order to smoothly carry out this plan, he even took some risks. He asked Luna to lure the only spellcaster in Roy's army away from the caravan and then personally kill him. At that time, even if the other party found any clues, they would only be able to associate it with the dragons. They would not be able to link it to the Stone Crow clan. Now that the oath was fulfilled, everything was settled. However, Olcash seemed to have doubts about whether the business of selling the summer grass fruit would succeed. He asked carefully, Lord Caesar, if we use that kind of grass and some fruits to brew something and sell it to the northern countries, will those little people really buy it? Before Caesar could answer his question, little Luna flew out from the thorns on the black dragon's neck. She knocked on Olcash's head and said unhappily, Those little people you were talking about, their lives are 100 times better than yours. How can they not want something so delicious? The existence of the forest fairies was no longer a secret in the Stone Crow clan. Caesar did not want to hide it. He had already regarded these green-skinned creatures as his own people. He was very clear that the orcs would never betray him. Moreover, to the Stone Crow clan, the existence of the five-color black dragon was the biggest secret. Even if Luna was the child of the forest, she was nothing compared to a true dragon. There's one more thing. Caesar did not care about the little guy. He smiled gently at Old Cash. The reason why he was deliberately gentle was because his voice was changing. His voice was developing in the direction of hoarseness and cruelty. Even if he said a few words normally, he would involuntarily show a fierce and ferocious feeling, just like his birth mother Nessitoria. So in order to not cause any misunderstandings, he had to restrain himself. You came at the right time. I need you to tell Save that if possible, he should cultivate the summer grass as soon as possible. The old wizard's spiritual link could not be maintained for such a long time. When he signed the oath with Roy, it was already broken. Caesar still had some things to say after that. I think once this drink is released in the northern countries, there will be people who want to know where it comes from. Many greedy people will rush into the wilderness and investigate your every move. From today onwards, let Save use his magic to cultivate the summer grass in his cave. From now on, you will only be responsible for picking wild fruits. Although it was just a quick profit from primitive accumulation, Caesar would not give up so easily if he could prolong it as long as possible and obtain more benefits. Understood. Old Cash nodded and responded subconsciously. After a while, Caesar saw that the orc was still standing there. He asked in confusion, "Is there anything else?" Old Cash scratched his head again and sat down cross-legged. "Good thing the leader asked me to bring this." He mumbled and took out a piece of parchment from the fur around his lower body. He looked at Caesar seriously. "Sir, I don't know how to write. Please." He could not remember such a long paragraph. Chapter 37. The weather is getting hotter. The clan leader leaned on the mottled bone staff and looked at the boundless sky, sighing slightly as he spoke. Because the dry season is coming again. Old Cash stood behind the old leader and watched the actions of the other orcs in the tribe. He seemed to be in a good mood. The little one has sent people over a few days ago. The quantity this time is more than last year. The chief commander of Gaul is already preparing. Just as Sir Caesar said, it seems that they have not found the formula for the summer grass. The fruits you picked have confused them. Save turned his head. "Old Cash, have you sent the bay sweet horn today?" "Don't worry." The orc behind him nodded without hesitation. "We don't lack food now. Half of the warriors are hunting for Sir Caesar. This guy is growing really fast. He can eat more and more." Save smiled. "It seems that I made a wise decision 2 years ago. You are the greatest sage of the Stone Crow clan for thousands of years." Old Cash complimented from the bottom of his heart. He looked at the old leader in front of him who had a slightly hunched back and felt very emotional. Ever since he could remember, he had rarely seen Sif smile, almost never. The old clan leader always pursed his lips and was a man of few words. He liked to stare blankly into space while leaning on the bone staff, silently watching the growth of every beastman, silently supporting the Stone Crow clan's progress. However, the situation in the tribe this year was much better than before. The orcs' lives had greatly improved, seeing that the days were getting better and better, and that there were no more newborns dying of hunger. The smile on the old leader's face slowly increased. The arrival of the black dragon was like a stream of flowing water, bringing life and hope. Firstly, the summer grass was a great success in the northern countries. Not only was it popular among the commoners, but also catered to the preferences of many nobles. Although Roy, who was in charge of the sales, wanted to embezzle this huge amount of money, he was restricted by the god's oath. He could only reluctantly give 60% of the profits to the Stone Crow clan. When the orcs saw their first haul and opened the chest full of gold coins, the others did not feel anything, but the old leader's Save was shocked. This adept was not like the other orcs. He had seen a lot of things in his youth and had made a lot of friends. He knew how much money was worth in the human world and how much food he could exchange for. It was inevitable that his heart would burn with passion. However, the money did not belong to the Stone Crow clan. It belonged to Caesar, and Save had no right to touch it. He He knew very well how attractive treasures were to dragons. He sighed softly and did not say anything. He closed the box and had 2 orcs carry it to the black dragon at the top of the mountain. However, what Caesar did next really shocked the orcs. The black dragon gave this treasure to the Stone Crow clan. It had been a whole year, but Old Cash still remembered what the black dragon said. The black dragon said, "The purpose of these gold coins is not to lie in my nest. They are as meaningless as stones here. Only by spending them can the true value of wealth be shown." Unfortunately, almost no one in the Stone Crow clan could understand the true meaning of these words. How could gold coins be compared to stones? Even the old sorcerer, Seth, who was known as the Wise One, did not understand what was going on. However, this did not stop the tribe from worshipping the black dragon. They followed Caesar's orders and used all the profits from selling the summer grass to buy food from the humans. At the same time, they exchanged for armor and weapons suitable for the orcs. They also bought many tools that they did not know how to use in the beginning. After obtaining the resources, under the guidance of Sir Caesar, the orcs continued to expand their territory and range of activities. The Stone Crow clan was no longer the same as before. They had already advanced from the Stone Age to the Iron Age. With enough resources, the warriors had more time to complete their training, improve their strength, and improve their fighting skills. The women did not have to worry about not being able to feed their newborns. They worked hard to give birth. As long as they could maintain the current cycle, the Stone Crow clan scale and fighting strength would multiply several times in less than 10 years. They would become a large tribe that truly had the right to speak in the great wilderness. How many people does Gaul plan to bring? Save, who had been silent for a while, suddenly asked. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the rising sun in the sky. 20 is enough. We have walked this path countless times. We are very familiar with the flying apes in the Mostel Canyon. There should be no problem, Old Cash said in a low voice. In the past year, the orcs had more or less changed a lot. Even the chief commander Gaul, who was not good with words, had become more talkative. Old Cash was the same. Okay, then you take the rest of the people to hunt. Then tell the women to start preparing. Save nodded and said in a low voice, "Tell the children that we are going to hold a Madala this year." Yes. Old Cash nodded and walked back subconsciously. However, he was stunned after taking 2 steps. He quickly ran back and asked with his eyes wide open, "You said you're going to hold a Madala?" Madala was the most important traditional festival of the orcs. Before the ancient orc empire fell apart, every year, Madala was a carnival for the orcs. No matter if they were strong or weak, high or low in status, they would all raise their cups and drink together on that day. They would hold each other's arms and sing to their heart's content. It was said that on that day, the Orc Empire invited the elves to perform operas and the dwarves to perform tricks. The warriors wrestled with each other and danced with the wolves. It was said that at that time, even the distant and powerful Southern Empire, where the sun never sets, sent messengers to congratulate them. However, such a vision only existed in stories. Old Cash had never seen Madala with his own eyes because the tribe could not hold such a carnival in the past. It was too barren. In the past, when the dry season came and Madala was held, the orcs of the Stone Crow clan could only keep everything simple. They took out the dry food they had stored and let the children eat a full meal. They knelt in the cave and prayed to their ancient ancestors to remember the arrival of Madala. Although Old Cash had heard the women talk about Madala before, he did not take it to heart. However, this time was different. He actually heard the old chief tell him that they were going to hold a Madala celebration this year. Are you serious? Old Cash was still not sure. Go and prepare. The old chief smiled and said, "It will be too late if we are late." It's not too late. Old Cash clenched his fists together and became excited. He nodded excitedly and turned to run back to the tribe. I'll go and invite Lord Caesar first. The orc's voice was getting further and further away. Save looked at Old Cash's back with a smile. When Old Cash's figure disappeared completely, he gradually stopped smiling and murmured, "Caesar, after I die, will you choose him?" Chapter 38. Madala? What's that? After dealing with the excited Orcash, Caesar rubbed his chin and muttered doubtfully. The black dragon's jaw had gradually begun to keratinize. The hardness of the area was amazing, and the texture was very good, like polished metal, smooth and delicate to the touch. It's a festival of the orcs. Little Luna slurped down a mouthful of fish fillet. Afterwards, she used a spell to pull out a card from the stack in front of her and slapped it on the ground. Attack 13. Another flame blast. Only 3 HP left. Hee hee, my magic will tear you to pieces. Why would they invite me for a festival? The true dragon and the orcs are not the same. Caesar muttered and pulled out a card from his claws. He very calmly brushed all the cards in front of Luna into the graveyard. Sorry, Wings of Death. You have no cards in your hand. Just admit defeat. You don't understand. Madala is a festival that the orcs take very seriously. They will only invite the foreign races that they recognize and respect. You should go. After quickly finishing the main topic, Luna flapped her wings and snatched the card that Caesar had played. She then said angrily, "You are completely cheating. There's no such strong black dragon in Iradia." She looked at the black dragon in front of her with contempt. This Wings of Death that I have to draw according to your model is purely your own imagination. Then every time you can't beat me, you start to talk nonsense. I am very doubtful if this card game really exists. Naughty, Caesar said with a smile, and put away the cards one by one. We have agreed on the rules from the beginning. The cards are also chosen blindly. It is purely a matter of skill if you can't beat me. Although Luna looked angry, she actually treasured this set of cards very much. After all, this set of cards was purely handmade by her. The cards were materials obtained from the trade between the orcs and the humans. The colorful patterns on the card were drawn by the little one according to Caesar's description with a feather pen that was exactly the same size as her. It contained a lot of the little one's effort. Ever since the 60 cards had been drawn, Luna had put in a lot of hard work to study the rules and would often pester Caesar to play with her. But she was still addicted to food and would often be angered by the black dragon until she couldn't find her bearings. Every time, the little one would angrily say that she would never play this game again. But in less than 2 minutes, she would excitedly beg Caesar to play another game. Let me think about the punishment. Caesar snorted and put the cards back into the stone box. He paused for a while and said, "How about this? You don't have to help me pick my teeth today. You can go outside and take a look. See how many people are watching the Stone Crow clan. Sigh, these guys are really like ghosts. I don't even dare to show my face." Due to the popularity of the summer grass fruit juice in the northern countries, people were very eager to know the raw materials and the formula of the fruit juice. Therefore, people were constantly watching the orcs' every move. They were as annoying as flies and difficult to drive away. In fact, this did not affect the Stone Crow clan much. After all, Caesar had already expected this. Before he lured Roy into the trap, he had already accumulated a batch of summer grass and handed it to Save to cultivate with magic. The orcs in the tribe continued to do what they were doing and maintained a peaceful life. However, Caesar was not so comfortable. With the passage of time and the acquisition of new achievements, the black dragon's body had become bigger and bigger. It was very eye-catching. If he went out without any scruples, it would attract a lot of attention. He would be easily discovered by the humans and cause a commotion. This was not in line with his original plan of secretly growing. Speaking of which, the black dragon had been living in seclusion for the past 2 years. The only time he made a move was when he plotted to kill the priest, Anrian. He had no choice. Anrian was in Caesar's way. If he had gone to Tulu Basin with him, Roy and the others would not have needed the orcs to rescue them. Then they would not have been able to talk about business. After that, Caesar hid in his nest and slept most of the time. Occasionally, he would cook when he was in a good mood. When he was bored, he would play games with the little one to relieve his boredom. Okay, I'll go now." Hearing his words, Luna nodded and flapped her little wings to leave the nest. At this time, little Luna had truly become the black dragon's dependent. She was completely captivated. The first thing that surrendered was her stomach. God knows why a true dragon would be interested in cooking. This guy was simply a gourmet food manufacturer. Honey barbecue, blackberry jam, ice fire steak, he had it at his fingertips. People would never forget it after eating it. Now that she thought about it, Luna felt that she was craving for it again. Secondly, Caesar was actually very easy to get along with. He could even be called gentle. Sometimes he was quite lively. Staying with him was not boring. He was not like a loathsome pinochet dragon at all. However, when facing people or creatures that got in his way, Caesar would show a side that was even more cold-blooded than the black dragon. He would take the lives of others at the slightest provocation. He was extremely cruel. Sometimes it was quite scary when she thought about it. Luna sometimes wondered if Caesar was faking it. However, she would quickly reject this idea. For a bad-tempered black dragon, it was too difficult for him to pretend to be like this. Moreover, Caesar had always been gentle and patient with her and the beastmen. If he wanted to pretend, this was the difficulty level of hell. The black dragon was just a label. However, this label would change according to one's behavior. At least for Luna and the Stone Crow clan, they would definitely not associate Caesar with the black dragon. At the same time, on the other side of the border, the Battle of Green Capital was nearing its end. In the past 2 years, the green dragon Sylvia had displayed unimaginable viciousness and intelligence. Just a few days ago, the green dragon had obtained secret information from somewhere and found out the exact location of the commander of the Northland Army. Then, it had used a shape-shifting spell to infiltrate the human race and assassinate the brave and skilled commander in an unexpected way, causing the human allied forces to suddenly fall into a situation where they had no leader. However, this alone was not enough. After confirming that the Alliance's army was in a state of discord, the Green Dragon purposely leaked the transportation route of the Green Capital's logistical supplies to the Northern Alliance army, who wanted to ambush them. At the same time, her loyal subordinate, the Ogre Chieftain, also made great contributions on the battlefield, crushing the camp of a kingdom's army. Under these circumstances, the northern countries could no longer maintain the stability of their armies. Using the war machine consumed resources at a rate no less than burning them. The humans no longer had the ability to continue this drawn-out war. In the end, the remaining 14,000 soldiers of the northern countries retreated to the Mostel Grand Canyon. The battle ended with Green Capital's glorious victory. Due to the Green Dragon's viciousness in this battle, the people added a new name to her title of Green Capital's Jade, the Mother of Poison. This was a curse of the humans, but the five-colored green dragon took it as a compliment. The victory of the battle caused the dragon's reputation to reach its peak. Her influence did not decrease in the long war of attrition, but instead increased. Even now, there was still an endless stream of evil clans that sided with the Green Dragon. Green Dragon Sylvia, who was standing at the heart of the storm, had greatly grown her ambition. She had doubled the size of her territory in a short period of time and extended her reach to even further places. Chapter 39. Matara began at dusk and lasted until late at night. The orcs invited the true dragon at the top of the mountain. The old wizard used a magic item to seal off the Stone Crow clan's territory so that outsiders would not be able to peek in. This allowed the huge black dragon to participate in the ceremony. The women used straw ropes to weave a palace and invited Caesar to sit beside the old leader, who was seated above the orcs of the Stone Crow clan. After the last time when Orgash was cursed by the Balrog, this was the second time Caesar saw so many orcs gathered together. Many children who rarely appeared ran out. They were not afraid of him at all. They stared at the black dragon curiously and played with each other. The orcs followed the ancient tradition. Regardless of their gender, they were all naked and wore painted leather shorts. A belt symbolizing the Stone Crow clan's emblem was tied around their waist as they sang loudly. They ate the roast beef with honey and pepper, drank the strong liquor from the northern countries, and laughed with each other across the campfire. Usually, these orcs were very frugal, but today was completely different. This was Matara, the most important festival of the year for the orcs. Plates of food were served in front of them. Fortunately, these orcs still remembered the black dragon when they were enjoying themselves. They knew that Caesar had a big appetite, so they did not hesitate to serve him a whole roast lamb. There were also plates of black sausages, pigeon pancakes, all kinds of fruits, and barley and venison soup. To the true dragon, this was the first cup of wine that the orcs raised. They knew very well that if it was not for Caesar, the Stone Crow clan would still be in poverty. They would not be able to hold the real Matara and could not afford to buy these ingredients at all. The orcs were grateful and respected the black dragon from the bottom of their hearts. To the Stone Crow clan as well. Caesar raised his cup politely. The stone cup in his hand was many times bigger than an ordinary wine cup. At this time, he suddenly missed his human body. When he first sat down, his huge body brought him a lot of trouble, and he made a lot of jokes. For example, he sat down on a stone pile, flipped over a table with his tail, and crushed a plate with his claws, and so on. Luna, who was on his back, felt embarrassed. She hid in the thorns and did not dare to look up. When the drinking was over, the women clapped their tambourines and danced for the warriors. At this time, the real highlight of Madala began. The men used the animal fat in the oil pit to rub their chests until they were glistening. They were all rubbing their hands in preparation, eager to show off their skills in front of the public. In the ancient Orc Empire, after eating and drinking, the orcs would enter the arena and fight with each other to fight for the title of the best warrior. Although the supreme empire of the past had long since fallen apart, this segment was unavoidable. The warriors all stood up with a smile and began to walk towards the center of the field. This was not a real battle of life and death, so the use of bloodline power was absolutely forbidden. Spells were also not allowed. In the Matara arena, they had to rely purely on their physical strength. The first orc entered the arena quickly. Immediately, there was someone to fight. The two warriors started a powerful barehanded fight. They jumped around in circles and attacked each other. The rest of the orcs formed a circle. No one intervened. They all widened their eyes and shouted the names of the warriors in the arena. The scene was very lively. They still have a long way to go. Save looked at the fight below the arena and said casually. He raised his cup again and thanked the black dragon beside him. To the most reliable friend of the Stone Crow clan. Caesar nodded politely and raised his cup. His respect for the old adept came from the bottom of his heart. Back when he asked this old orc for advice on the principles of magic, Seve didn't dawdle at all after he agreed. He taught Seve everything he knew without the slightest intention of deceiving or misleading Seve. As time passed, Caesar became more familiar with Iradia. He also knew how precious the knowledge of the other world was. Of course, Seve also had his own reasons. The old sorcerer would not casually teach his knowledge of magic to other races. He would definitely prioritize his own race. However, the orcs were born with low talent. Until now, there had not been a second orc who had the talent to become a spellcaster. Seve was already very old. He had to think about the future. He did not have much time to wait. He could only teach what he knew to Caesar and pray that he could pass down the path of the Stone Crow clan through him. However, what he did not know was that Caesar did not live up to his expectations. The blood in this guy's body was not filled with elemental magic like other true dragons. Although he had memorized the precious knowledge taught by Seth, it was difficult for him to complete even the most basic tricks in practice. It was even more difficult for him to become a spellcaster. Sometimes, Caesar would think that he was a one-in-a-million loser among the dragons. Cliché and melodramatic. F***CK Gaul. 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 At this moment, cheers were heard in the arena. It interrupted Caesar's thoughts and attracted his and Seve's attention to the grass-woven palace. Gaul was a great warrior. Even if he did not use his bloodline power, his physique was still much stronger than the other orcs. Moreover, he was very hardworking. He spent every moment training his combat skills. In terms of physical combat, he was the best of the Stone Crow clan. At this time, he had already defeated 5 orcs in a row. He was still not out of breath. He also defeated the popular contestant, Old Cash, and kicked him to the ground. He obtained his 6th victory. Gaul. Gaul. The orcs were shouting his name excitedly. This orc, who was almost 2 meters tall, looked around and found that the victory was already decided. None of the 100 warriors came forward to challenge him. However, this great commander was also arrogant in Madala. He was still not satisfied. He turned his gaze to the seats where Save and Caesar were sitting. The orcs followed his gaze and were stunned for a moment. Suddenly, a voice shouted, "Fight him! Save! Fight him!" Cheers were soon heard. "Fight him! Save! Fight him!" Caesar was speechless. Just as he was hesitating, he saw that Seth had already stood up. His stooped body straightened amidst the cracking sounds of his bones. He casually took off the old robe that had always been draped over his body, revealing his similarly well-developed muscles, and began to walk forward. Madala is a carnival for the orcs. Legend has it that when the Orc Empire held Madala, even the emperor had to follow the tradition. He had to fight when challenged. Luna squatted on the table in front of him, holding a pancake that was bigger than her. She nibbled on it like a squirrel. She explained to Caesar, "However, even if he loses, it will not affect the position of the Orc Emperor." Caesar shifted his gaze again. Surprisingly, in the arena, the great warrior Gaul was temporarily at a disadvantage. The experience of the old leader was far beyond these young orcs. Moreover, Save's strength was not weak either. He punched Gaul until his face was bruised and swollen. Caesar stared at the scene in a daze for a while. The difference between his imagination and reality gave him a toothache. What kind of spellcaster was this? He was so good at close combat that he was even stronger than a great warrior. However, due to his age and physical strength, the strong old leader could not hold on any longer. He stopped in his tracks, panting. He had no choice but to admit defeat and leave the arena. Cheers were heard again. "Gaul, this little bastard." Save smiled and returned to his seat. He shook off the dust on his robe and put it on again. "He almost pulled out my teeth." "It was you who pulled out his teeth." Luna was busy nibbling on her pancake. She could not help but complain when she heard this. Caesar wanted to say something, but he noticed that Save was smiling. He raised his chin at him and signaled him to look down. All the drums, cheers, and banquets stopped abruptly. Caesar turned his head and looked down. He saw that all the orcs were looking at him, waiting for the true dragon to come down. "Do I have to go too?" he asked Save. The old leader smiled and replied, "As a true dragon, you have the right to refuse. This is just an orc tradition. TSK, they really treat you as one of their own." Luna muttered softly. Caesar thought for a moment and decided to join. He was not as proud as the dragons. He was different from the Penishade dragons and the metallic dragons. He was willing to get along with the orcs without prejudice. This was the real reason why the Stone Crow clan respected Caesar. Chapter 40. Reality proved that there was no harm without comparison. When Caesar entered the arena, Luna raised her head. Ignoring the crumbs in her mouth, she subconsciously blurted out, "So big." She was used to staying together in the nest, so she didn't feel it. But when Caesar stood in front of the nearly 2-meter-tall great warrior Gaul, the obvious and strong contrast brought about a huge, dazzling impact. Only Caesar himself knew that he was only 10 years old. At this age, he would be considered a teenager even among the short-lived humans. But this guy's body was already 12 meters tall. What did 12 meters mean? One had to know that his mother, the black dragon Astoria, was only 16 meters long when she was in her prime. Well, calm down. This guy was developing too quickly. It was obvious that he had grown a lot recently. This was because of the 4th bronze trophy he had received. After Caesar obtained his first fortune from the summer grass trade with the humans, a reward appeared in his dark dream. Profit Seeker. Dragon Body Gene Enhancer Type. This reward stimulated Caesar's body to rapidly grow again in a short period of time. As a result, the young Caesar was almost as big as the young black dragon. However, he was completely different from the ordinary black dragon. Caesar's 4 horns didn't change. They were still hard and sharp, but his jaw had become as big as the blue dragon's. Furthermore, it was covered with a layer of visible cuticle. His fangs protruded out of his mouth. His body was also not as skinny as the ordinary black dragon. Instead, it was covered with knotted muscles. He was as strong as the red dragon. No, this guy was definitely stronger than the young red dragon. On Caesar's tail, there was a cuticle ball that looked like a battering ram like the green dragon. Its surface was covered with fine spikes. If one was hit by it, one would be paralyzed. What was even more infuriating was that this fellow's claws were as sharp and long as the white dragon's. They were as sturdy and powerful as the beasts that crawled on the glaciers. Their lethality was not to be underestimated. Well, other than the black dragon's topaz eyes and dark scales, this guy was almost completely cut off from the black dragon. If the five-headed dragon Queen Tiamat were to find out about his appearance, she would probably think that Caesar was a direct descendant of hers that she had left behind in Iradia at some point in time. She would try every possible means to keep it by her side. It was worth mentioning that after receiving the Prophet Seeker reward, Caesar's body had gradually formed a ferocious aura similar to dragon's might. Unlike the natural suppression that a dragon's elemental bloodline exerted on other races, Caesar's aura stemmed from the manifestation of his genetic upgrade. It was a biological suppression that a high-sequence Beyonder creature exerted on ordinary species. This thing, as he matured, would probably be even more effective than dragon's might. However, although Caesar already had the size of a young black dragon, he would still feel very uneasy if he were to really face a young dragon, other than a white dragon. In order to prevent himself from becoming arrogant, Caesar had once carefully analyzed the situation and came to the conclusion that the odds were about 50-50. After all, a dragon at that age would have truly matured into a dragon. They would be able to use quite a number of spells and abilities, making them rather dangerous. His reverie came to an end for the time being as he refocused his vision. Caesar was still able to deal with the beastmen who didn't use their bloodline powers easily. He was able to easily overturn the aggressive Commander Gaul and give him a good beating. The suppression of strength, coupled with Caesar's kind provocation, infuriated the other beastmen. They had no choice but to join the battle and wrestle with the black dragon with their numbers. Even the little beastmen weren't afraid. They babbled as they ran over to hug the black dragon's tail. Their faces flushed red as they shouted. The so-called duel was completely reduced to a joke. Madala ended amidst laughter and laughter. The dry season is coming. The Rhine Kingdom of the North, the noble district of Kaki, Count Brendel's mansion. Roy looked at the rising sun in the east and muttered to himself. Then he came back to his senses and walked into the mansion. He personally knocked on the mahogany door of the study. "Father, come in." After he entered, he stood silently at the side because the owner of the study, Count Brendel, was listening to the butler's report. So far, the iron or business managed by young Master Nina has earned 37,000 gold. Young Master Roy has earned 20,000 gold from the wine and fur business. Roy lowered his eyes and looked as if he didn't care what the butler said. He had been with Count Brendel for more than 20 years and knew that his father hated being interrupted when he was talking. Count Brendel blew on the hot black tea, took a sip, and then put it down. He said casually, "Roy, I know that you used a lot of the family's resources. Recently, your business has been very big. Even Duke Ryan has heard of your name. However, your income seems to be a little low. In fact, through my hands last year, the wine business alone earned as much as 100,000 gold, father." The butler stepped back and Roy stepped forward. He bowed slightly and said softly, "But I signed an agreement with the wild beast men. 60,000 gold went to them and was sent to the Stone Crow clan. There are still 20,000 left. My subordinates." Count Brendel grunted in response. "I don't know how much power you have gathered outside, and I won't ask in detail. But since you can't find the raw materials for that fruit juice, is it difficult to deal with a group of beastmen? Actually, I'm a little hesitant." Roy shook his head and continued, "Anrian's death is very strange. Although there is no evidence that it was done by the Stone Crow clan, I still feel that they are not simple. The things that happened at that time are too much of a coincidence." "What are you worried about?" The Count motioned for the butler to leave. Roy pursed his lips and said his guess. I suspect that someone is supporting the Stone Crow clan behind the scenes. There's a mastermind behind all of this and cleared all of the obstacles for them. Now that I think about it, the Stone Crow clan was already unable to support themselves a long time ago. They were selling their pelts at an unimaginably low price. If they had this miraculous fruit juice, they would have taken the initiative to talk to me about a deal. Moreover, I suspect that Anrian's departure from the team was arranged. If he was coincidentally present when we encountered the Balrog's curse, we wouldn't have needed the Beastman's fruit wine. He was deliberately lured away. Later, we found a burned forest a few miles away. The traces showed that there had been a battle there. I have reason to suspect that Anrian was killed there and the evidence was destroyed. Roy slowly straightened his body and looked into his father's eyes. This is the reason why I haven't done anything to the Stone Crow clan. Other than their great mage leader, I suspect that there is another person or creature in the Stone Crow clan. All of this was arranged by that creature. It is cunning and cruel. It killed Anrian just because he was in its way. While Roy was talking, Count Brindle listened quietly. When he stopped, he lit the tobacco in his pipe and asked, "These guesses are based on your intuition. How sure are you?" "I'm not sure." Roy shook his head and said bluntly, "So far, there is no direct evidence to prove the existence of the creature in my imagination." Brindle smiled. "If that's the case, then give up on taming these beastmen. Go get the formula for that thing, and then consolidate your forces in the wilderness. It may come in handy in a few days." But no buts. The old count waved his hand and brushed away the non-existent smoke in front of him. "We have a new trump card in our hands. I want to see how powerful it is." "Yes." Roy raised his eyebrows and bowed. "I'll send someone to contact the Green Capital." With just a few words, Count Brindle had decided the fate of the Stone Crow clan. When the apex predators of the natural world were ready to hunt, they would never hold back. They would never leave a chance for their opponents, whether they were facing a rabbit, a fox, or a tiger. Chapter 41. Oh phew. Luna found Caesar under a canopy of green leaves. The black dragon was half lying down with its neck flat on the ground. Its sharp claws were drawing on the ground, writing indecipherable words. "It's growing really fast." Luna could not help but think as she watched Caesar's beautiful black scales gradually turn into the dark gray used for camouflage. She felt that she should not interrupt his thoughts. Every time Caesar fell into silence, he would become extremely serious, even a little scary. So the forest fairy swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth and waited quietly. The wind blew the treetops, rustling them. Luna's thoughts also became chaotic. It seemed that Caesar Orderonso had entered his youth. That was the beginning of sexual maturity. Would he start looking for a mate? He definitely would. She saw Caesar's ferocious horns, sharp fangs, and strong body. In the eyes of dragons, this guy was definitely the best choice for co-breeding. Many female dragons would definitely like him. The forest fairy suddenly became a little angry for some reason. At this time, Caesar finally got up slowly and shook off the dirt on his body. "Luna." Caesar saw her standing there and said, "The Stone Crow clan is gradually getting on the right track. I'm thinking about the next arrangements." He did not need to explain to the little one, but Caesar was willing to say more. Although the forest fairy was forcefully captured by him, she had now become one of the few creatures that the black dragon could communicate with. "There's one thing I think I should tell you." Luna shook her head, indicating that she did not mind waiting for a little while. "A lot of humans have appeared near the Stone Crow clan. That's normal." Caesar stretched out his claw and let the little one sit in his palm. "The dry season is coming. Many people have remembered the fruit juice that could dispel the Balrog's curse. They have come to the Stone Crow clan to investigate, hoping to find some clues." He sneered in his heart. Whether it was on Earth or Iradia, there were many such thieves who were not presentable and wanted to reap without sowing. "It's different." Little Luna shook her head expressionlessly. "I've seen those spies before, but it's different this time." "Caesar." She emphasized her tone. "Do you think normal spies would be in groups of 3 to 5, carrying standard weapons and distributed around the clan?" "Standard weapons?" The black dragon was stunned. then looked down at the little one in his claw and looked into her eyes. You sure? If there's nothing wrong with my eyes. Luna was 100% sure. I don't know when this group of humans started appearing at the edge of the clan's territory. They were wearing light armor of the same style, and there were patterns on their short swords that I don't recognize. Moreover, I saw that almost everyone was carrying something wrapped in cloth. Judging from the shape, I guess it might be a crossbow. Luna became more serious as she spoke. They were carrying quivers in their leggings. Caesar completely stopped climbing into the nest. After listening to Luna's description, his expression became serious, and he muttered to himself, "Scouts. In Iradia, these people should be called bandits, but most of the professional bandits did not use crossbows. They had better bows and arrows to choose from. Under normal circumstances, a bow of the same weight would shoot 3 to 4 times faster than a crossbow. The only advantage of a crossbow over a bow was that it could be aimed. It could be pulled at any time according to the command of the commander to maintain unity. If they had to use a bow to do this, sometimes the negotiations would be in a stalemate for too long, and the archers would be exhausted. Only the army would be equipped with crossbows. These people were scouts sent by the army. Do the orcs know? Caesar was a little uneasy. This was not a game. The appearance of the scouts was actually a signal, which meant that some of the human forces had decided to make a move against them. Damn it, they had just gotten on the right track. Couldn't they give them more time? They know, but there have been too many humans recently, and they don't seem to care. The news chain was broken at Gaul, and even Save was not notified. As an intelligent species, Luna also realized the seriousness of the situation and spoke quickly. Then I'll have to trouble you to make another trip. Caesar held the little one in his hand and let her flap her wings to fly. Go and inform Save about this. Invite him to my nest for a discussion. Also, inform the warriors to pick up their weapons and prepare for battle. Okay, Luna answered. When Save entered the Black Dragon's nest accompanied by the great Orc commander Gaul, he couldn't help but be surprised by the living habits of the Black Dragon. Caesar's nest was not as dirty and filthy as the book said. Instead, it was unusually clean, neat, and orderly. Your Excellency Caesar, your residence is truly amazing, the old wizard complimented. This is all thanks to our children of the forest. Caesar glanced at Luna, who was sitting in a small stone house, and did not continue the topic. Instead, he turned to Gaul and asked, "Have the warriors started preparing?" "The children can't wait." Save answered for Gaul, his forehead wrinkling. "But please forgive the orcs for being slow. I have some doubts. Is the situation as serious as the forest fairies said?" "I'm afraid it's more serious than that." Caesar nodded solemnly. "It's a disaster for a weak race to occupy rich resources. I knew this day would come, but I didn't expect it to come so soon." Without waiting for Save to reply, Caesar continued, "Please allow me to remind you that when you return later, you should remind the women and children to get ready to move." The Stone Crow clan may need to move at any time. Caesar would never place his hopes on the weakness and stupidity of his enemies. He had to prepare a way out in advance. Cutting off all means of retreat and putting all your eggs in one basket sounded nice and imposing, but when it really came down to it, people would realize how unreliable it was to put all your eggs in one basket. It was impossible that the orcs did not know that the Stone Crow clan had an archmage. However, if they still wanted to attack the orcs under such circumstances, they probably had full confidence. Therefore, Caesar had to be cautious. While preparing for battle, he also had to prepare a way out. Hearing Caesar's words, Save's expression became serious. He understood Caesar and knew that the Black Dragon would not speak without thinking. "I understand." The old chief nodded solemnly. "We will not allow those small fellows to threaten the clan. We will wait here. If they dare to come, the orcs will give them a heavy blow." Great Commander Gaul clenched his fists together. His words were sonorous and forceful, as if he was making an oath. "No." However, the Black Dragon sighed and shook his head, as if he did not agree with Gaul's words. The straightforward orc immediately became anxious. "My lord, we have armor and weapons. Please don't worry. The orcs will definitely fulfill their promise to you." I said no. Caesar repeated his words with a heavy tone. He then stood up and stared at Gaul. Waiting will only lead to destruction. You should take the initiative to attack and weaken the enemy's strength as much as possible. The black dragon finally revealed his fangs. Go now. Take your weapons and clean up the humans outside, as if they were trash. Don't leave a single one alive. Chapter 42. Caesar. After Sif and Gars left, Luna, who was in the small house, flew in front of him again and couldn't help but ask, "You really want to kill everyone outside?" "Yes, but many of those people are foreign adventurers. They're only here to inquire about the summer grass. They're not enemies." The little fellow's emotions fluctuated slightly. "Not now, but that doesn't mean they'll never be." Caesar shook his head. "Do you think these people will turn a blind eye to the arrival of our Lord's army? No, they'll only join the crusade against the Stone Crow clan. They'll add more straw to the dying camel and try to get a share of the spoils of war." Caesar had never been afraid to judge others with the greatest evil intentions. The war was coming. He had to try his best to strangle the threat in the cradle. If he didn't break up the wolf packs before they formed, the Stone Crow clan would face the fate of being eaten by the wolves one by one when they gathered into a group. But it's so cruel. If someone finds out about your existence, Orderonzo's name will definitely be on the crusade list of the righteous. Luna was a little worried. "So what?" Caesar smiled at her. "I've always been an evil dragon." If possible, Caesar did not want war. He was not the kind of transmigrator who wanted to defy the heavens. In his previous life, he was just one of the millions of ordinary people. As a black dragon, Caesar did not have any bullish asterisk T desire to rule the world. He only wanted to guard his own land and be a mediocre lord that was neither too big nor too small, neither good nor bad. He would farm and sell cards, and when he was free, he would go to the vast Aladia and take a look at the scenery of the other world. His dream was small, but there were people who would not let him do as he wished. Then he might as well die. After 2 years of recuperation, the Stone Crow clan now had 100 strong orcs who could be called warriors. However, they did not launch an attack directly. Under Caesar's command, the 100 orcs were divided into 2 groups. One group put their weapons and armor on the ox cart and covered them with cloth. They shouted to each other as usual and left the clan's territory as if they were transporting summer grass. The other team, on the other hand, was completely silent. Their eyes were bloodshot as they quietly stayed in their respective caves. They were fully armed and were waiting for their commander's orders. Apart from a few scouts sent by the army to follow the orcs, no one else paid any attention to the orcs who had left. That was because the orcs had been going to the Monster Grand Canyon almost every day to deliver goods and summer grass. The humans were already used to it. The observers were more concerned about the movements in the Stone Crow clan's territory. The 6 scouts who were in charge of following the orcs who left yawned and were absent-minded. They were originally ordered to observe the Stone Crow clan to see if there were any unusual creatures. They were not interested in these ugly, green-skinned orcs. The leader of this group was Orcash. Although this guy was usually a little silly, he was very competent when it came to carrying out his mission. He followed Caesar's instructions and joked with the others on the way. He even allowed the orcs to go into the forest to hunt and slowed down their speed. They were delayed again and again. Before they could even travel halfway, the sky had already turned dark. Orcash grumbled loudly for a while. He then ordered them to stop moving and set up camp. It seemed like he was prepared to spend the night here. The orcs sat down and started a fire to roast the meat that they had caught. When they smelled the fragrance of roasted lambs coming from the camp, the scouts who were in charge of following them could not take it anymore. The 6 humans had been watching the orcs' movements and did not have the time to hunt for fresh meat. They could only stuff the dry rations that they carried with them into their mouths. After walking for half a day, they were hungry and thirsty. Looking at the orcs eating the roasted meat, the 6 scouts were filled with resentment. At this moment, they saw the leader of the orcs waving at them and calling out, "Friends, friends," inviting them to share the delicious food. "So the orcs have already discovered us." The scouts looked at each other. one of the scouts suggested. His voice was very rough, and he was much older than the others. If you ask me, since they have already discovered us, why don't we just stand out in the open? This guy's hair and beard were unkempt. He did not look like a soldier, but more like a bandit or a robber. Since these orcs dared to invite us, we can't show our cowardice and be looked down upon. Let's just go up and eat. How about it, do you dare? The old fox instigated. But these people were Count Brindle's direct troops and did not let their appetites get to their heads. They shook their heads and said, "If you want to go, go by yourself." "Cowards!" The unkempt scout scolded, then stood up and adjusted his belt. "I'll go alone." As he said that, under the disgusted gazes of the others, this guy walked casually towards the orcs' camp. Half an hour later, the old fox puffed out his stomach and raised his eyebrows. He returned safely as if he had returned victorious. His mouth was full of oil, and he burped repeatedly. It was obvious that he had been warmly treated by the orcs and had eaten his fill. This time, the other scouts really cannot take it anymore. Coincidentally, the orcs sent out another invitation. So they left the old man who was full to be in charge of rotating, and all of them swarmed into the orcs' camp. These orcs obviously did not treat them as outsiders. They shouted to each other and passed the fragrant roasted meat to the 5 humans who were slightly uneasy. The delicious food reduced their vigilance to the lowest point. In between big mouthfuls of meat, the leading orc suddenly slapped his head and apologized to the 5 human soldiers. Then, he took out 2 jugs of good wine from the northern countries from somewhere. This time, they ate even more happily. They did not even care when Old Cash said that he wanted to give the wine to the old man from before. They allowed the strong orc to raise the wine and walk towards the place where the soldiers were originally at. 10 minutes later, suddenly, there was a shrill scream in the distance. The 5 soldiers in the camp were shocked. They quickly threw down the roasted meat in their hands and jumped up with their swords. However, they found that they were surrounded. The orcs who were originally smiling and charmingly naive all changed their faces, revealing fierce fangs and sharpening their swords as they walked towards them. The screams did not stop. The few scouts were quickly chopped into meat paste. At this time, Old Cash also returned from not far away, his protruding fangs stained with blood. The orcs lifted the cover on the ox cart, and as they put on their armor, they teased, "Old Cash, you didn't bite that person to death, did you? I didn't expect you to have such a hobby." That guy was quite strong. He almost got away. Old Cash scratched his head and laughed foolishly. He raised a torch and set the surroundings on fire. His smile was especially scary in the light of the fire. The wilderness in the dry season was set ablaze. The fire burned fiercely and thick smoke billowed. It was now late at night. The flames in the dark would make all living things panic, but it did not affect the orcs who were born with night vision. The fire was the signal for the orcs to attack. They split into 2 groups. One group charged from the clan's territory, and the other group surrounded them from the outside. In this situation, the old wizard Save also chose to take action to ensure that nothing went wrong. This was a massacre. Chapter 43. The fire lasted for an entire night. Caesar thought about it again and again, but in the end, he did not make a move. Instead, he stayed in the nest and waited for news. He had reason to suspect that the scouts were here for him. The Stone Crow clan's battle prowess was not a secret. Whether it was the great mage Save or the 100 warriors, they were all openly exposed to outsiders. If the other party really wanted to take over the tribe, there was no need for them to send scouts. They could have just quietly surrounded the area and attacked as quickly as possible. Then, there was only one reason for them to send scouts. They guessed that the Stone Crow clan was supported by someone else and wanted to find out more about it before attacking. It's that guy. Caesar suddenly thought of the unusual leader of the merchant group, Roy Brindle. Among the humans, only he had close contact with the Stone Crow clan and would have such suspicions. That was why Caesar chose to bide his time for the night to avoid being discovered by the other party's warlocks, I spell. Sometimes the unknown was even scarier than a sharp sword. Before Roy figured out the power of the Stone Crow clan, it was unlikely that he would launch a large-scale attack. Instead, he would continue to send out small groups of people to harass the Stone Crow clan. And Caesar happened to be able to use this to nibble away at Roy's strength step by step. When dawn broke and the beastmen dragged their tired bodies and gathered together, he realized that many of the warriors were injured. Some of them were even more serious. We killed a total of 144 humans. Gaul grimaced in pain. His right cheek was swollen as if he had been hit by a hammer. 80 of them were armed with crossbows. They were using the standard weapons you mentioned. These guys are stronger than the adventurers. They were able to hold their ground and launch an effective counterattack when we launched a surprise attack. 12 of our brothers were killed by swords and arrows. Gaul's voice was choked with sobs as he spoke. With such a casualty ratio, the results of the battle were, in fact, quite fruitful. However, those who died were after all their fellow tribesmen, so it was inevitable that the beastmen were in low spirits. Go back to your nests. Those who need to sleep, sleep, and those who need to recuperate. Caesar ordered the orc warriors. No one knew when it started, but he had smoothly taken over the control of the orc warriors. After the warriors were pacified, the black dragon turned to the old wizard and asked, "If I'm not mistaken, the women of the horde are not as weak as humans. When necessary, they can also pick up a weapon." "Yes," the old wizard nodded. His main purpose last night was to use magic to monitor the entire border of the territory to prevent any fish from escaping the net. With such a heavy workload overnight, even an archmage like him could not bear it. He looked exhausted and haggard. It's just that it's difficult for them to have the same combat power as men. Save's words were slightly concealed, mainly because he was worried that Caesar would send the women to carry out dangerous missions. After all, in the battle last night, even the elite warriors had suffered casualties. If it had been the female beastmen who had weaker combat power, the number would have probably increased by several times. "Don't worry." Caesar heard Save's unspoken words and said calmly, "The women don't need to fight for the time being. Let them be responsible for the reconnaissance mission. If they encounter the enemy, prioritize their own safety and try to avoid them." In a situation where both sides did not know each other's strength, the confrontation of intelligence and reconnaissance became a relatively important part of the battle. If Roy could know Caesar's existence and strength first, he could quickly judge the situation and launch an attack. On the other hand, if Caesar was the first to discover the camp of the human army and where the commander was, he could also formulate a decapitation plan to kill the enemy. War was not a game. Speaking of which, it was the first time that the Black Dragon encountered such a situation. Without experience, he could only try his best to apply his knowledge to practical operations, supplemented by an extremely cautious mentality, and strive to do the best he could with caution. The soft sound of the forest lingered in the ears. The stream at the bottom of the valley flowed, meandering through the stone riverbed. The sunlight sparkled on the surface of the water. Under the trees, the war horses neighed softly, stretching out their hooves to dig at the solid soil covered with dried leaves. The soldiers lowered their voices and joked with each other. From time to time, Roy could hear the faint sound of spears colliding and chainmail sliding. This time, he brought 1,000 soldiers and had just passed through the monster Grand Canyon. However, his expression did not look too good, because the scouts that he sent out earlier had completely disappeared. Roy had a premonition that those soldiers had died in the wilderness. They were discovered by the enemy and were swallowed whole. As time passed, the facts gradually confirmed his guess. Interesting, Roy played with the family emblem in his hand. As a member of the Brendel family, he would not take the death of 80 soldiers to heart. What truly shocked him was the decisiveness and cruelty displayed by the other party in this confrontation. He had ordered the soldiers to avoid conflict with the Stone Crow clan as much as possible, and even retreat if necessary. Their mission was to see if there were any strange creatures in the Beastmen tribe. Without using weapons, those stupid Beastmen would definitely not be able to sense the danger. There is only one possible reason why the Stone Crow clan would strike first and kill all of them in cold blood. That was, there was another person or a highly intelligent creature among them. That person or creature was controlling the Stone Crow clan. Based on its own analysis, the Stone Crow clan decided to kill the potential threat while it was still in the cradle. At the same time, the Stone Crow clan would show its power to its potential enemies. Roy had imagined the existence of that creature more than once, but sometimes he also wondered if he was fighting a battle of wits with the air. But now, everything was clear. That creature must exist. Interesting fellow. What are you? Human? Fairy? Strange creature? Or a dragon? Roy laughed. The enemy was very smart. He wiped out all his scouts in one fell swoop, not leaving a single one alive, causing him to know nothing about him. Next, if he continued to send people to investigate, it would be exactly what that creature wanted, and his strength would be slowly eroded by that creature. But Roy narrowed his eyes. What the enemy did not know was that this was a sign of his lack of confidence. If that creature was really a fearless and powerful existence, then he would not care about the scouts he sent. He would only let the human soldiers wander around the Stone Crow clan and wait for his main forces to appear. Then he would bare his fangs and devour them all in one go. That creature is definitely not so strong that he cannot accept it. After coming to this conclusion, Roy acted quickly and immediately began to give orders K2s. Here, the trusted knight who had shown his face before took 2 steps forward. Take 10 people and go to the Knoll and Kobold clans on fast horses. Tell them to prepare for battle and wait for news in the 3rd forest of the wild. Yes, the knight placed his hand on his chest and listened to the order. He squeezed the horse's belly and ordered 10 people to go with him. Everyone else is not allowed to leave the group. Stay here and rest. We will set off again in half an hour. Roy drank a mouthful of water and got off his horse. We must reach the wild at dawn 2 days later. Chapter 44. A faint chirp of a bird could be heard from afar. It was a high-pitched and sharp trill. The orcs who lived in the wilderness used this method to transmit information. Caesar had been staying with the Stone Crow clan for a long time, so he was very familiar with this method. We found them. A young and vigorous female orc appeared in front of Caesar and reported to the giant dragon hidden in the darkness. The humans are making quite a commotion. Almost 1,000 people have entered the wilderness. The one leading them is the little guy who made the deal with the tribe. We didn't dare to get too close, but from the looks of it, there are at least 30 knights and the same number of servants. There are about 300 cavalrymen and free riders who are either armed with spears or swords. The rest are ordinary soldiers who are armed with spears and tridents. Are there any spellcasters? Caesar asked directly. This was the key to the problem. In Iradia, every spellcaster was a strategic weapon. Sometimes, they could even decide the direction of a war. The female orc shook her head, indicating that she did not know. It was already quite difficult for them to count the number of people in the army. It would be difficult for these non-professional scouts to find the spellcasters who were heavily protected. Fortunately, the Black Dragon did not have high hopes for this. The big guy in the darkness nodded, indicating that he understood. After encouraging the orc, he let her go. TSK, 1,000 people. When the orc's figure disappeared from sight, Caesar rubbed his chin and let out an unknown sigh. He did not expect that Roy would spend so much just based on a guess without any evidence. In order to deal with the Stone Crow clan, he actually gathered such a huge army. As expected, those brainless villains who would constantly send their underlings to deliver heads and experience points only exist in the stories made up by bards. The strong Black Dragon held his head and was full of resentment. He originally wanted to hide behind the scenes and become an achievement harvester. However, after discovering the strength of the enemy, he immediately gave up on this plan. What did it mean to have 1,000 professional soldiers? Even when the Northern Alliance went to war with the Green Capital, the Northern Alliance only managed to gather an army of 30,000 to deal with the old Green Dragon and the many evil races under her command. Furthermore, this included the logistical personnel who could not participate in the battle. The number of professional soldiers was probably less than 25,000. The Stone Crow clan alone won't be able to defeat them. Caesar shook his head. He had long known that this young man's identity was not ordinary, but he did not expect him to be so ruthless. Without saying a word, he directly pulled in an army of 1,000 people. In Iradia, if one did not consider the legendary level strength, this was already a very powerful force. Not to mention the others, just the 30 knights were enough to make the Stone Crow clan suffer. Fighting against such an army was definitely not easier than fighting against an adult dragon. Following that, another piece of news floated into his lair. The orcs had discovered that the other native clans in the wilderness had begun to move and had begun to gather. At this critical juncture, Caesar did not dare to hope that the natives would become his allies and form an alliance to resist the invasion of the humans. On the contrary, it was more likely that these clans were originally Roy's lackeys and had begun to move after receiving his orders. Adding insult to injury, should he avoid them? This thought flashed through the black dragon's mind, but he quickly rejected it. What kind of joke was this? He had spent so much effort to train the orc clans and build a good foundation for them. Now that they were just on the right track, how could he just give up so easily? Since he did not intend to give up on the Stone Crow clan, he had to do it himself. Otherwise, this orc clan would definitely be turned into ashes under the iron hooves of the army. All right, I'll do it myself. The huge black dragon crawled out of his lair and stared at the busy orcs below. I wanted to develop my strength, but you guys wouldn't let me. However, even if he planned to personally take action, Caesar still had to make a plan. The other party was not some random trash. If he directly went up to face them head-on, even if it was him, he was afraid that he would be cut into pieces because his head was not strong enough. Only the rash red dragon and the dumb white dragon would do such a thing. Thus, the black dragon narrowed his eyes and carefully studied the map drawn by the child of the forest, Luna. He invited the old wizard, Save, and the chief commander, Gaul, and began to make preparations for the battle. You must immediately move the injured and the children secretly. This is the weakness of the clan. Now that this area is about to become a battlefield, you must not let yourself have any worries and leave behind any hidden dangers. Now, Caesar's serious face was not as ugly as when he was young. It was rather imposing. But Gaul asked hesitantly, where are we going to hide them? The Stone Crow clan only had this one home. Now that they were in chaos, they could not think of a safe place for the orcs to hide. Here, Caesar drew a circle on the map on the ground, Tulu Basin. With the summer grass, the orcs would not be afraid of the Balrog's curse. Caesar asked them to move all the injured and the children, as well as the stored food and resources, into Tulu Basin. This narrow entrance, easy to defend and difficult to attack, will become the Stone Crow clan's last line of defense. If you don't want to sit and wait for death, we must take the initiative to attack. Caesar said, when the night comes to an end, I will attack that army and then retreat. You will ambush them here. He pointed at a spot on the map. Listen carefully. Caesar emphasized and said, 30 to 40 people will be enough. If they chase after me, the formation of the army will definitely be affected. You must hold back and let the knights pass. Then attack the normal riders. Kill as many as you can. Be careful not to get entangled with them. You must retreat before the footmen arrive. At this time, they will definitely send some people to chase after you. The rest of the warriors, black dragons, shining claws, moved an inch to the left. I will meet you here and then ambush them. If they're smart enough, the knights will give up on chasing after you and focus on killing the orcs. At this time, I will not be able to catch up with them even if I return quickly. Caesar smacked his lips and moved his finger to a new position. He looked at Save and said, that is why I need you to intercept them here and cast AoE spells. If the orcs and the knights engage in close combat, the horde will suffer great losses. Only you can take care of the 30 knights. When I came back, they should have given up and retreated first before regrouping. But if these fellows continue to recklessly chase after me, we will counterattack here. The night was silent. The moonlight shone and the shadows were heavy. The ground was covered with a thick layer of fallen leaves. The mountain ridge was covered with dense forests. The hills slowly descended until they reached the dry riverbed. Here, the orcs had a full meal and then fell asleep. When dawn came, they would have a long battle. It required a lot of stamina, so they had to adjust themselves to their best condition. And here, Black Dragon crawled on the hill and blended into the night. His yellow eyes blinked occasionally and looked down. Chapter 45. Roy's heart grew more and more gloomy as he watched the troops pass through the black swamp of the next swamp and enter the border of the wilderness. Even though he buried his worries under his calm mask, they still existed and grew with every kilometer they crossed. Was it because the Green Capital had replied that the Green Dragon was going to delay its arrival? No, that was not the case. He, Roy Brindle, was the son of a count. He did not need to rely on external forces to deal with a mere beastman clan. After so many years of exploration, he knew the wilderness like the back of his hand. Besides, he had an army by his side. Logically speaking, he should be fearless and as steady as Mount Tai. However, tonight was an exception. Unlike the past, there was an indescribable feeling in the darkness that made his hair stand on end. It made him extremely uneasy. His intuition had always been accurate. He sensed danger, as if he had overlooked something. That was the reason for his worries. Human nobles were often paranoid, and Roy was no exception. He was an ambitious man, so he was even more sensitive and paranoid. He wanted everything to be under control. He repeatedly checked his deductions to make sure there was no mistake in his logic, but he did not know where the uneasiness came from, and there was always a layer of haze in his heart. Stay alert, he reminded his soldiers and glanced at the sky. The stars were fading away, indicating the arrival of dawn. However, the land that had lost the light of the stars and the moon would be the darkest moment of the day, and also the time when people would be the most relaxed. The eerie wind blew the shadows of the trees, making them look like ferocious living creatures. Roy felt that he was being watched by a cold and inexplicable thing that did not like him. The spellcaster beside him seemed to have noticed it too and gripped his staff tightly. Damn it, what did I miss? Soon he found out. A muffled clap of thunder jolted Roy out of his thoughts. He looked up at the sky, only to see dark clouds that were as thick as cotton. Suddenly, a terrifying roar came from not far away. Roy's body tensed up involuntarily, and the people on the ground were shrouded in a huge shadow. A deafening roar broke out in the sky above his head and tore the atmosphere apart like a hurricane. Roy desperately tried to stabilize the terrified wildebeest while barely looking at the sky. Unfortunately, this time he saw a hellish sight. A monster that was as dark as black smoke filled Roy's vision. It roared as it extended its sharp claws and swooped down on the army. Dragon. It was an adult black dragon. They were attacked by a dragon. The army was in an uproar, people shouting and horses neighing. Fortunately, they were not useless people but real soldiers. Even though they were surprised, they did not panic. They were the most elite professional soldiers of the Brindle family in Kaji territory, and they reacted quickly and met the enemy head-on. The cavalry ordered their horses to spread out, and the vanguard, clad in black armor, raised their shields and drew close to each other, forming an impenetrable wall of iron. The shields were about half a man's height, and these soldiers formed a formation that was used for close combat. In close combat, the importance of defense was the most important. They spread their legs and used their shoulders to support the large shields. They wore heavy armor, and their free hand held a sharp sword. As long as they could block the dragon's attack, they would be dragged into the mud and be slaughtered. Training to fight against dragons was a compulsory course for professional soldiers in Iradia. But because the black dragon was too strong and fierce, they subconsciously used the battle formation used to deal with the red dragon. At the same time, the black dragon arrived. In Iradia's long history, almost every famous battle was related to dragons. Nothing could compare to the scene of a dragon and a human fighting against each other. In an evenly matched battle, whether it was a dragon or an army, the power displayed would be admirable. Bronze and steel shattered with a hoarse, clanging sound. The sound was slow and strange, and the echoes were endless. The gigantic black dragon directly crashed in, like a meteor falling from the sky. Countless sturdy shields shattered at this moment. The soldiers on the first line of defense had their bones and tendons broken, and they howled in pain. Its power was too strong, and it made people feel like they had crashed into a mountain. The defensive formation kept moving back. "Hold the line," Roy roared in the native language of the northern countries. The blood vessels on the warriors' hands were already spurting out blood, but they raised their shields even higher. The black dragon responded with an earth-shaking roar. With such elite soldiers, perhaps even a mountain would be able to stop them. The defensive formation was shattered in a short period of time, but the impact of the black dragon's dive also ceased to exist. It had already folded its wings. It was time for close combat. The black dragon was warmly welcomed by the unmistakable clanging of steel and the creaking of bodies. Now, it was facing the siege of a regular army. There were more than 100 people in front of it. "It's our turn now. Go and counterattack." The leader of the human warriors shouted out the order. The soldiers raised their weapons, returning the favor with swords and heavy hammers. Even further away, the archers had already finished aiming and pulled the trigger of their crossbows. Arrows that blotted out the sky and covered the earth also whistled through the air. Roar! Facing the surging crowd, the black dragon roared and opened its mouth wide. The next moment, the air suddenly twisted and a blazing stream of fire swept through the human formation. Flames! The nerves near Roy's temples throbbed violently. How could this damn black dragon spit out flames? It was unbelievable. Wasn't that an ability that only the red dragon had? Fire was a weapon that was difficult for most creatures to resist, especially humans. Nearly 40 soldiers were instantly turned into charcoal, and even more were suffering from indescribable pain, unable to continue attacking. Ice barrier. However, the flames raged for less than 10 seconds. The roaring magical light had already swept through the bodies of the soldiers, resisting the invasion of the flames and preventing them from suffering. There was indeed a spellcaster. The black dragon's movements clearly paused for a moment. Its terrifying vertical eye swept in the direction of the sound. It saw that not far from Roy, there was a spellcaster in a black robe sitting quietly on a workhorse. Seeing the black dragon's gaze sweep in this direction, the spellcaster seemed to have sensed something. He reached out a hand and gently lifted his hood. There was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth, and he looked at the black dragon fearlessly. Then, under the gaze of the black dragon, the spellcaster raised his staff. Fireball spell. The spell model had already been constructed. An unparalleled elemental fireball appeared at the front of his staff, locking on to the violent black dragon not far away. It roared at the speed of Mach level. Faced with the shockingly fast fireball spell, the slow-moving giant dragons could not possibly dodge it. They could only rely on spells to block it. So, at the same time, when the elemental burst, the experienced spellcaster had already prepared the Cursed Disturbance spell and stared at the black dragon's every move. He was ready to break the opponent's spell at any time and let it eat a solid fireball. Chapter 46. However, just 2 seconds before the elemental flames gushed out, Luna, who had been staying on the thorns behind the black dragon's neck, had already spoken. "Pay attention. The fireball is targeted at the heart." Caesar's eyes blinked. Using his forelimbs as support, he twisted his waist and swung his tail, drifting on the spot. He used his battering ram-like tail to flip over the soldiers who were pestering him endlessly. Then he exerted all his strength and dashed to the left, moving a distance of nearly 7 meters in a second. The next moment, the magic light wrapped in the elemental fireball whistled past his ear. It did not slow down at all and was completely unaffected by air resistance. It sank into the deep darkness in the distance. It was not until a long time later that a thunderous explosion came from there. "Archmage!" Caesar's whisper and Luna's exclamation sounded at the same time. He had long guessed that there was a spellcaster in this army and was prepared. The reason why he did not use his breath ability at the beginning of the attack was because he was afraid that the fire and ice would be blocked by the opponent. However, he did not expect that this person was actually a highly accomplished archmage. A regular army of more than 1,000 people, accompanied by 30 knights and an archmage, was it worth it just for a groundless guess? Roy's caution was evident. Just as Caesar redefined the enemy's strength, the Black Dragon's movements also exceeded the human's understanding. Damn it! What's up with the Black Dragon's smooth and flowing movements? Was it a trick? A giant dragon that was not known for its speed actually dodged a fireball with its body without casting any magic. The shock that Caesar brought to the Iradia people was probably similar to how people on Earth felt when they saw a tortoise suddenly run as fast as a cheetah. This dragon was actually so terrifying. This world had gone crazy. The person who was the most shocked among the humans was the initiator of the fireball spell. This spellcaster's cursed disturbance was still ready to be cast. His staff was raised halfway, but his entire person was already stunned. He fell into a daze as he watched the Black Dragon launch another attack. As a postnatal spellcaster, almost every mage was a polymath and had an extremely rich knowledge. They had dabbled in all aspects of the Iradia. In his understanding, a giant dragon would never be able to perform such an action. Without considering magic, the biological structure of dragons made it impossible for them to dodge as quickly and accurately as mammals. Their muscle activity was also relatively low. It took a long time for them to discover danger and mobilize their muscles. This is not a dragon at all. Thinking, the spellcaster once again began to construct a spell. Let's catch it first. Compared to the mage who had been in a state of confusion all along, young people's to new things were far higher than the old beside him. After he witnessed the ability of this black dragon, he became more and more cautious. After witnessing the ability of the blacks, he became even more cautious. Similarly, the commander of the army was not affected. Maintaining calm was the most basic quality of a commander. Although Black Dragon's display of maneuvering was heaven-defying, the commander was still as immovable as a mountain, methodically issuing orders. Throw. After discovering the incredible hardness of the Black Dragon's scales, the commander immediately changed his strategy. He signaled for the soldiers holding the ordinary crossbows to retreat and let the spear-wielding throwers take their place. At the same time, carts covered with black cloth were pushed onto the battlefield. Caesar originally thought that it was food supplies for the army, but after the curtain was lifted, he realized that he was wrong. It was a heavy weapon shining with a black metallic luster. Ballisti. This world had gone crazy. Caesar also wanted to say this. He originally thought that Roy was a cautious and ambitious person. Who would have thought that he was simply a lunatic? He even brought ballisti for siege. And there were 10 of them. If he did not see Roy's bewildered expression, he would have thought that it was all part of a plan. He guessed that the other party was ambushing him. Caesar maintained the rhythm of his attacks. He did not directly rush in to attack the spellcaster and Roy. He knew that Roy and the spellcaster were indeed the most important part of the army, but they were also the most tightly protected part. If he was really stubborn enough to rush in and kill someone, regardless of whether he could touch the other party or not, he definitely wouldn't be able to come out alive from the quagmire of swords and spears. Caesar's target was not them in the first place. The Black Dragon wandered around the edge of the army. He relied on his powerful strength and speed to control the rhythm, ensuring that he would not be surrounded by the knights. But even so, the Black Dragon was slowly being pushed into a corner. The army's reckless attack brought great trouble to Caesar. It should be known that whether it was the ballisti or the spears, they were not ordinary weapons. They were enchanted with armor penetration. They were specially made to deal with dragons and giants with thick skin. No matter how thick the armor on his body was, it would be difficult for him to withstand such a vicious beating. At this time, Caesar's body was covered with numerous wounds. But this attack he had directly or indirectly caused the death of nearly 200 soldiers. The army had suffered heavy losses. That was enough. The Archmage was already casting the next spell. The arrows and javelins with the armor penetration effect covered the sky. The mission had been completed. Caesar was afraid that his life would be in danger if he continued to fight, so he prepared to retreat and move on to the next plan. Roar! The black dragon roared. It opened its mouth and spat out a huge ice wall. Before the defense was broken by the enemy mage, it spread its huge wings and soared into the sky to escape. Bang crash! After only a second, the ice wall shattered under the decomposition spell. The knights mounted their horses and prepared to give chase. I'll go too. The mage squeezed the horse's belly. Before he left, he did not forget to say to Roy, I must catch that dragon. As the Archmage of the human world, he did not have to worry about Roy's orders. He was very interested in that strange dragon. He wanted to catch it and study it properly. Looking at the black dragon gradually disappearing under the sunlight, Roy's eyes flashed. Any intelligent creature's actions were supported by the root cause behind it. He did not believe that this was a simple attack. What was the black dragon's purpose? Was it just to show off its strength and kill a few of his soldiers? Impossible. As the mastermind behind the Stone Crow clan, it would not give up its greatest advantage in hiding and expose itself to the enemy for such a ridiculous reason. That guy wasn't an ordinary dragon. He was extremely cunning and intelligent, taking every step with great care. Roy thought, after the incident, he had sent a prospector to investigate the mine in Tulu Basin. The result showed that it was not a gold mine at all. The orcs had put the gold they got from somewhere there. The purpose was to lure him to take a look and cause him to be cursed by the Balrog. It was the same with Anrian's death. Everything was planned. The purpose was to show him the orc's fruit and ask for a trade. He had been fooled by the black dragon from the beginning. In that case, considering that the other party was so good at scheming, this definitely wasn't a last-minute attack. The black dragon's appearance and escape definitely had a motive behind it. Perhaps there was a series of traps behind it, and the beastmen who hadn't shown up yet might be hiding somewhere in the dark. Roy's thoughts were running fast. He made these judgments in a flash. However, the opportunity was fleeting. He could not and would not let the other party leave after showing off. He had to get back at them. Wayne, Roy decisively called for his trusted aide and calmly ordered, You are in charge of leading the men to chase after the black dragon. Pay attention. Do not let the troops be separated. Those knights must slow down and stay in the same formation as the riders. If you encounter any orcs lying in ambush on the way, give up the chase and kill those bastards first. He used two must, and the words seemed to be squeezed out from the gaps of his teeth. But my lord, the rider named Wayne was in a difficult position. Those knights, the 30 knights, were not Roy's direct troops, but Brendel's personal guards. For the sake of the Count, they might respect Roy, but it was simply a fool's dream for them to listen to a servant. Take it. Fortunately, Roy was well aware of this. He took off the pendant from his neck and passed it to his trusted aide. Remember what I said. And you. Seeing his trusted aide leave on his horse, he pointed to the servant beside him. Go and inform K2s. Tell him to bring the Kobold and Knoll clans out of the wilderness. Do not let the natives know that there is a dragon here. This is the most important thing. Go and do it now. Leave half of your men to check on the wounded, clean up the battlefield, increase the surveillance, and guard these 10 ballistae well. Roy's eyes shone with a cold light. The rest of you, follow me to the Stone Crow clan immediately. The black dragon wants to ambush my men, so I will destroy its nest first. Chapter 47. The huge black dragon passed by in a flash, and the cavalry behind him galloped like a stream. Caesar maintained the altitude and distance of his flight, looking back from time to time. He was extremely vigilant. To him, luring the pursuers was even more dangerous than fighting with the army earlier. Unlike the dragons that relied on magic to fly, Caesar was able to soar in the sky, purely relying on the ascension force generated by the flapping of his wings. Therefore, his wingspan was extremely wide, and now it had already reached more than 20 meters. One could imagine how big of a target a dragon like this would be. And in a situation where he used his wings to soar, an injury to his wings meant that he would lose the ability to fly. Therefore, he had to cherish his wings very much. The javelins and crossbows of the cavalry behind him were no joke. The reason why Caesar would rather land and fold his wings to engage in close combat with the army at the first moment of the surprise attack than fly over their heads and use his breath to kill the enemy was precisely because of this reason. However, despite Caesar's meticulous thinking, he still suffered when fighting with the humans. He preconceived that he would be able to scatter the army with his first round of attack, and then he would attack wantonly. Naturally, he thought that the humans would be at a loss and run away like rats when faced with the attack of a giant dragon. However, in reality, only a motley crew of low-level adventurers would make such a mistake. In such a situation, the real well-trained army would first think of fighting back. Even if the Black Dragon surprise attack was timed very well, that was the time of the day when humans were the most tired. Roy's army still reacted immediately. The army of more than 1,000 people instantly formed a defensive formation. The shield-bearers and crossbowmen were all in place, blocking the Black Dragon's charge. After the first round of attacks failed, spells whizzed out, and the ballistae were ready to fire. This kind of terrifying execution and quality was beyond Caesar's expectations. The army of the Middle Ages on Earth, in his previous life, could not have reached this level. Perhaps only the later modern mechanical army could be comparable to this. If the Black Dragon's body was not strong enough, and his mental quality was not strong enough, facing such a counterattack, he would have been stunned and his mind would have gone blank. It's still too subjective. Black Dragon exhaled a puff of white air from his nostrils. He was reflecting on himself. In Iradia, he could only be considered an ignorant child. There were still many things he needed to learn. The humans here were not the same species as those on Earth. They were not weak at all. Instead, they were very strong. There was a simple reason. In such a cruel world where monsters ran rampant, if one was not strong enough, it was impossible to develop to the extent of establishing a country. It should be known that there were countless forces of various sizes in Eladia, and there were tens of millions of intelligent creatures. Currently, only the human nations remained. The rest were either defeated by them or annihilated in the long river of time. Currently, half of the world's land was under the control of humans. In fact, they were the race with the greatest authority in Iradia. Every year, the number of dragons that died in the hands of humans was not small. Not to mention dragons, there were some unparalleled legendary mages among humans who were simply lunatics. They had even done things like killing gods. However, people as strong as Iradia were not without weaknesses. Caesar frankly admitted that he was no match for this army. If he could not defeat them, then he could not defeat them. There was nothing to be ashamed of. It was difficult for him to destroy such a regular army with his current ability. However, the strength of this army lay in their combat power after they were organized and organized. If these people were to line up one by one to fight against the Black Dragon, perhaps even 10,000 people would not be enough to defeat him. As long as the army could be scattered and broken up, they would be able to fight. Caesar was more and more certain of his plan. However, the commander of the other party was also very smart. He seemed to be able to guess his plan. Caesar had tried to speed up to pull the pursuers, but the knights behind him would rather distance themselves from him. They were still determined to stay with their companions and maintain their formation throughout the process of the pursuit. Thinking about it, they were probably prepared to be ambushed. If I change my mind and join up with the orcs to attack the knights at the same time, will it work? Caesar calculated in his heart and thought of a plan. The battlefield was constantly changing. In a situation where it was difficult to carry out the established plan, he had no choice but to make adjustments and come up with a new plan. There were 30 knights and a great wizard in this group of knights. If they did not scatter, even if they were to face the attacks of Yongling and the orcs at the same time, it would be difficult to defeat them. Even if Yongling won, the orcs would definitely suffer heavy losses. Moreover, putting aside whether Caesar could accept this result, his opponent was very smart. Under the situation where he guessed that the knights might be ambushed, Roy would definitely not sit and wait for death and watch the knights get slaughtered. That guy would most likely bring people to follow behind the knights. Although his speed was slower than the knights, he would be able to complete the counter-encirclement of the orcs who were ambushing the knights. The result was self-evident. If he acted rashly, it was very likely that he would suffer a crushing defeat. Caesar did not dare to gamble. He was not Roy. He did not have so many cards in his hands like the other party. He only had a small Stone Crow clan. He definitely could not bet on his opponent. Placing hopes on the opponent's stupidity was tantamount to digging his own grave. However, Black Dragon narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself, "Your people can follow behind and counter-ambush them, but those heavy weapons can't run that fast." Caesar's thoughts turned to the ballistae that he remembered deeply. "Luna, I need your help." In the whistling wind, the Black Dragon whispered to the little girl on his neck, "Go to the orcs' designated ambush location now and tell them to give up on the ambush. Bring along save and take a detour to the battlefield where I encountered the army earlier. If the human army is still waiting at the same place, lead them to me and ambush these scumbag knights." Caesar twisted his body and dodged the javelins that were thrown at him from behind. His long period of flying training played a crucial role in this moment. If Roy divides his forces again and lacks manpower, let Save lead the orcs to attack that army. Kill them if you can, but destroy all 10 of those armor-piercing ballistae. Okay. In the thorns that Caesar could not see, Luna nodded heavily. Then, a worried expression appeared on her face. "But there's a human archmage here. He's very powerful. You don't worry about me. You have to be fast. You have to be fast." Black Dragon gritted his sharp teeth and solemnly said, "If the enemy divides their forces, they will definitely consider the danger that will follow. So, the orcs must race against time. After you leave, I will turn back once and attack the cavalry. I will hold them here." The strange giant dragon turned around and looked at the pursuing soldiers. Yellow's eyes flashed. "As for the rest, I hope Save won't disappoint me." Chapter 48. Time passed by quickly. In reality, Caesar had guessed wrongly. Roy had never thought of splitting up his forces. He had already made a clear judgment after the battle with the cavalry. With 30 knights and 1 archmage, they were strong enough to deal with the orcs' ambush as long as they were fine. Even if the Black Dragon came back to attack them, they could still retreat safely. That was why Roy had chosen to attack the Black Dragon's lair directly. He had already made up his mind to get back at them. Splitting up his forces was the best choice he could think of in the current situation. The best outcome now was to split his forces into 2 groups. The cavalry would defeat the orcs who were ambushing them, and he would lead his men to slaughter the Black Dragon's backup forces. The old, weak, women, and children of the orcs could more or less be considered a threat. In a mobile battle like this, he had to be careful with every step and plan carefully. He had to do his best to cut off all the wings of the orcs. Moreover, the Black Dragon's lair would not be too far away from the Stone Crow clan. It seemed that the dragon was at least a youth. Such a sinister and vicious black dragon. Even if the wealth in its nest could not be said to be comparable to that of a country, it was still much richer than other dragons of the same age. With this money, he could definitely recoup his losses from before. Roy's mind was full of wishful thinking. However, when he really arrived at the settlement of the Stone Crow clan, he could not help but become extremely angry. The Stone Crow clan, which had been prosperous for the first time in the past, was now in a state of desolation, as if it had been ransacked. There was nothing but abandoned stone tools and old flags that were still fluttering in the air. It was obvious that the orcs had migrated and abandoned this place. Damn it, no matter how well-educated Roy was, he could not help but curse with an ashen face. His trusted subordinate looked around. After confirming that there was no ambush around, he picked up a broken stone bowl from a pile of abandoned stone tools not far away. He pinched the edge of the bowl with his thumb and index finger and wiped it gently. "Sir, The trusted subordinate looked at the traces of dust on his hand and said softly, "They did not leave for long. They just left recently." That guy. Roy clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and squeezed out word by word. All of this has been planned long ago. It has already anticipated this step. The orcs would never migrate for no reason. There was only one possibility. They had received orders from the Black Dragon and knew that staying here would be dangerous, so they left early. Roy was so angry that he almost vomited blood when he saw this scene. He had lived for 24 years, and he had always been the one humiliating others. Now, for the first time, he felt the pain of having his intelligence suppressed. That strange-looking black dragon was even more meticulous than him. "Sir, do we still need to search for the black dragon's lair?" Seeing that Roy's face had turned pale, the trusted aide asked cautiously. "No need," Roy replied stiffly with a gloomy face. These dragons, who value wealth as much as their lives, always put their own treasures first. Since even the orcs have left, its treasures must have been moved away. The trusted aide retreated, but he thought for a while under the sun and changed his mind in the end. He ordered, "Leave 10 people here. Even if this place has turned into ruins, you have to keep an eye on it. Maybe something strange will happen. Once you discover something, report it immediately." "Understood," the soldiers said in unison. Under the scorching sun, he did not know why he had that uneasy premonition in his heart. He was immediately stunned and got on his horse. "I know you are very tired, but now is not the time to rest. Come back with me, quick." In the end, Roy still led the large army out of this place and returned empty-handed. On the other side of the wilderness, the orcs had quietly reached the battlefield where the black dragon had come into contact with the army. "We can only sneak up to here. There are human soldiers patrolling in front." Luna flapped her wings and floated in front of a group of orcs. Her little face was red, and the hair on her forehead was stuck together with sweat. She looked rather embarrassed. It was obvious that she had rushed with all her might and was very tired. At least a few hundred meters away, the orc commander Gaul put his hand in front of his eyes and gestured a few times. He then stared at the patrolling humans not far away. These small people are very strong. The defense is tight, and the gaps between their patrols are very small. It is almost impossible to sneak in. "We have to hurry." Caesar said that the other side might return at any time. "We must act immediately," little Luna urged, flying up and down in the air. "He has to stall the cavalry. He might be in danger. The human archmage is very powerful. If that is the case, then we can only force our way through." Gaul clenched the steel hammer in his hand and slowly arched his body. The nearly 2-meter-tall orc wanted to rush forward, but he was stopped by the old wizard in a robe. "Don't worry, I will do it." The old wizard signaled Gaul to stay calm. He then smiled kindly at the forest fairy. "Little one, it seems that Caesar needs your help. Your mission here has been completed. Leave the rest to the orcs." "Okay, now is not the time to be polite." Hearing him say that, Luna immediately turned and left. She flapped her wings and turned back. At the same time, Save also gently raised the bone staff beside him. The staff that was full of cracks and looked as if it would shatter in the next second finally began to show its true power. Magical light rippled. Shadow, following body. The reason why spellcasters were so respected in Iradia was because of their incredible abilities. They could perform feats that normal creatures could not imagine and were used as strategic weapons. Just like now, under the miraculous effect of Save's magic, the bodies of all the orcs began to fade. They gradually became one with the air as they breathed and entered a state of invisibility. Even the clanging sounds of their armor clashing against each other were completely covered up by the magic. "Go, children. Remember your target." Save pointed his staff forward. The air around him began to move. The wind whistled and brushed past his ears. Obviously, the orc warriors had begun to move. They maintained their silence and sneaked into the human camp step by step. However, their enemy's military discipline was shockingly high. In fact, this army was the most important tool that Count Brendel used to achieve his ambitions. If the numbers were not considered, they were probably even stronger than the Northern Allied army. They could be called the elites of the elites. In fact, this time Count Brindle had sent them out purely for regular daily training, but he did not expect to run into a tough opponent, the Black Dragon, who was just as strong. Even though their bodies and voices could be concealed, the strange flow of air and the unique smell of the orcs could not be erased. This valiant army relied on such details to discover the orcs before they reached their target. Enemy attack. They have spellcasters. A long roar rang out. In the second half of the roar, the human camp was already filled with the sound of long swords being unsheathed and crossbows being pulled. Kill! In the next second after the human alarm sounded, Gaul also roared and jumped out. His steel warhammer pierced through the armor of the soldier closest to him. For the Stone Crow clan, the orc warriors appeared from the air and roared like wild beasts. At the same time, dark clouds suddenly gathered in the clear sky. Lightning storm. Chapter 49. Lightning storm. At the moment when the magic light shot up to the sky, a strong gale surged and the forest howled. The clear sky was suddenly filled with dark clouds and lightning bolts intertwined. This scene was like a natural disaster. This was the power of a spellcaster. The more enemies there were, the more space they could use. As long as the strategy was right, an archmage could even destroy an army. Hold the line. Following the roar of the human commander, the flow of people shuttled. Amidst the clanging of armor, sturdy shields were erected one after another. With 10 heavy crossbows as the center, they built a high metallic wall that flickered with light. This army of 1,000 soldiers was attacked by the Black Dragon and lost nearly 200 of them. After that, 300 cavalrymen were sent to chase after the Black Dragon. After that, Roy left with half of the soldiers to attack the Stone Crow clan. How many professional soldiers were left to guard the battlefield? This was a simple math problem. In this place, there would not be more than 250 people. Caesar's decision was undoubtedly correct. This was the best opportunity for the orcs to engage in battle. The opportunity was fleeting, but it was seized by the Black Dragon. Energy flowed, and a lightning storm brewed for a long time. Finally, the forked lightning bolts with a destructive aura came whistling. This was the strongest spell that Save could cast at the moment. Just this one spell alone almost drained all the magic power in his body. Its power did not disappoint. The moment the lightning bolts arrived, the humans' defensive position exploded like a pot of boiling oil. They were immediately defeated and smashed into pieces by the violent lightning bolts. The soldiers who were at the front line suffered immeasurable losses. At least 50 people were killed on the spot. Those who survived lost their ability to move. The electricity flowed through their bodies under the armor, causing them to convulse and emit a smell like burning flesh. An unparalleled thunderous strike caused the garrison to lose the strength of nearly 100 soldiers. However, this terrifying lightning storm was blocked by them in the end. The soldiers received the order to protect the ballistae. Until now, the 10 heavy weapons were safe and sound. At this moment, the army had changed from a defensive formation to an aggressive melee formation. The elite soldiers' eyes were red as they gripped the shields and swords in their hands tightly. They stared at the tall and ferocious orcs in heavy armor. There was no other way. The 80 orc warriors had to fight against the human elite soldiers that outnumbered them by twice. Now it's our turn. The commander of the army waved his arm and pointed his sword forward. Counterattack, for Brindle's glory, for the Stone Crow clan. The roars of the humans mixed with the roars of the orcs, turning into an immortal war song. There was even a creaking accompaniment, the sound of the heavy ballistae adjusting their aim. Bang! An orc who was bathed in blood did not even have time to see clearly when his heavy armor was shattered into pieces. A huge wound was blasted on his back as he was pierced through. The thick, heavy ballistae did not slow down at all. The orc flew back 7 to 8 meters and was nailed to a huge withered tree. Only then did he stop moving forward. Roar! The orc roared. His vitality was very strong, and he did not die immediately even after receiving such an injury. His expression was horrifying, but he still held onto his axe tightly. He struggled to attack, but his head was chopped off by the human soldiers. It was no wonder that the dark dragon had such a deep impression of this item and could not forget about it. This was an ultimate weapon with the enchantment of armor penetration. Even the slightest scratch would cause an orc to lose all of his combat ability. Even someone as strong as Caesar felt that he was going to die after being hit by 3 of these arrows. Even though the arrows did not hit his vitals, they severely restricted the black dragon's body. The 3 thick and terrifying armor-piercing ballistae were still hanging on the black dragon's body. If the battle continued like this, the orcs would definitely be finished. They would go for wool and come home shorn. They would be killed by the human soldiers instead. Fortunately, they also had strategic weapons that were not inferior to the armor-piercing ballistae. Save narrowed his eyes and hid his head in his tattered hood. He was rapidly constructing a spell model, trying his best to cast the next large-scale destructive spell. The battle had just begun, but quickly became white-hot. The number of people on both sides was rapidly decreasing. A familiar scene was playing out in another place. War had become the main theme of the wilderness. On the other side, Roy's cavalry was also fighting with Caesar. Roar! The huge black dragon flapped its wings, and corrosive acid poured down like rain. Even though Caesar's acid breath was not much more powerful than his own kind, it could still cause considerable damage to metal products like armor and weapons. He controlled the way he spat, trying his best to increase the coverage and density of his attacks. Even if the opponent had a spellcaster at the level of a great wizard, it would be difficult to maintain such a large-scale shield over a long period of time. Now, Caesar was high up in the sky, very far from the ground. At such a distance, it was very difficult for him to use fire and ice to cause damage to the humans. These 2 types of breath would dissipate in the air and could not cause any real damage. Moreover, he had another type of breath. Acid would also dissipate in the air, but due to its nature, its power would not be reduced. Instead, it would be increased. The acid breath turned into acid rain in the air, covering a large area and causing continuous damage to the human cavalry. This is not a bad idea, Caesar thought as he used his body to resist the high-altitude turbulence, maintaining the stability of his flight. It was worth mentioning that as time went on, Caesar discovered another unavoidable weakness of the humans: stamina. No matter how well-trained and powerful these soldiers were, they were limited by their race. Stamina was their ceiling. Other than a few special cases, the humans could not compare to the powerful orcs in this aspect, let alone compete with the dragons. Now, after such a long period of fierce battle, whether it was the cavalry or the war horses they were riding, they were gradually showing signs of fatigue and were no longer in peak condition. Of course, the opponents were not fools. The cavalry had already realized the crux of the problem and had begun to retreat, preparing to return to the camp and regroup. But at this time, the Black Dragon would not let them leave so easily. If possible, Caesar even wanted to transfer the female orcs from the Tulu Basin to fight Roy's army 24 hours a day. The balance of the war tilted left and right. The roles of the hunter and the prey seemed to be about to be reversed. Chapter 50. Caesar already had a good understanding of Roy's troops after the continuous exchange of blows. This army was well-trained and could be considered a rare elite. However, other than the 30 knights and the Great Wizard, they were still unable to break away from the category of mortals. This created a huge hidden danger in the army. As time passed, the knights who were entangled with the Black Dragon were clearly running out of stamina, their stamina severely depleted. If not for the existence of spellcasters, Caesar could have annihilated them all by now. Should I get a try? The Black Dragon hovered in the sky, looking down at the densely packed humans like ants, and hesitated for a moment. He was still in good condition. After all, he had gone through 2 rounds of genetic modification, and the attributes of his body were much better than those of a true dragon of the same age. He was still full of energy and the wound caused by the heavy ballista had already clotted and stopped bleeding. His movements were no longer restricted. Then let's give it a try. After much consideration, Caesar decided to launch another attack in the end, even without the help of the forest fairies. After all, after his repeated harassment, the fighting power of the knights had decreased by more than 1 point. Caesar had no reason to give up on this opportunity. How could there be so many good things in the world that would fall from the sky if one wanted to obtain high profits without taking any risks? If he could defeat this cavalry, the enemy's entire force would suffer a severe blow. If Roy was rational enough, he might choose to immediately cut his losses and give up on this battle. Great Wizard Anthony sat on a warhorse with gray stripes, the staff inlaid with rubies and sapphires glistening in his hand. He narrowed his eyes and kept looking up at the clouds. He saw a grayish-black figure rushing straight out of the faintly discernible fog. It flapped its huge black and red wings, sweeping away the surrounding clouds and fog, and then began to dive down at high speed. Can't hold back anymore. Anthony smiled and casually cast fearless brilliance on his cavalrymen. At the same time, his warhorses were also shrouded in it. It seemed that the black dragon had an indomitable momentum this time, completely different from the careful probing and harassment from before. It seemed that he was going to do it for real. Spread out. Prepare to meet the enemy. The temporary commander, named Wayne, loudly ordered. In fact, he did not need to say anything. Even if these elite soldiers were very tired, their vigilance did not drop at all. They spontaneously sensed the danger and immediately began to look for a position to meet the enemy, preparing for battle. Even the knowledgeable Archmage Anthony could not help but marvel at the ferocious appearance of the black dragon before him. This was the beauty of pure strength. The thick black scales, the solid and protruding chin that seemed to be made of steel, the horns that meandered to the left, right, front, and back, as well as the 3 completely different breaths. All of these were indicative of the uniqueness and strength of this black dragon. In terms of strength alone, this black dragon was probably not much weaker than an adult red dragon of the same age as it. But that wasn't the main point. What really made Anthony uneasy was that the guy in front of him hadn't cast a single spell yet. As an adult true dragon, this was very abnormal. That was why Anthony had always maintained a high level of vigilance, his nerves stretched taut. He was worried that this clever and cunning dark dragon was purposely numbing him, holding back a big move, waiting for the right time to use an unprecedented draconic magic to strangle everyone. At this time, their target had arrived. Roar! Caesar locked on to the landing point, folded his wings in midair, and dove straight into the camp of the knights in front. He crashed down like a meteor, using the impact to cause as much damage as possible. He was still unable to fight like an adult true dragon. Considering the huge and fragile characteristics of his bat wings, he would rather land and fight the enemy in close combat than hover at a low altitude. When he landed, the battle began. The black dragon roared and swept its tail like a hammer at a knight. The frail armor that had been corroded for a long time could not absorb such power and shattered into pieces. Amidst the sound of metal cracking, the thorny sarcoma on the tail slammed into the knight's chest, smashing his internal organs into a pile of mush. In short, it was an instant kill. However, this army was not easy to deal with. When Caesar used all his strength to kill one person, the humans' counterattack followed closely behind. Bang, clang. In just 2 seconds, at least 5 weapons of different styles smashed into Caesar's body at the same time. Blazing sparks burst out, and some even tore through his sturdy scales, leaving wounds on his body. These knights were obviously not on the same level as the free riders and cavalry. The knights had more stamina and speed, and their strength and reflexes were much stronger than ordinary soldiers. However, the mutant black dragon in front of them was also an expert in hand-to-hand combat. This guy's body was obviously not as sensitive to pain as other true dragons, so it was almost impossible to make this guy cry out in pain with a single slash. It would only make him more ferocious and run amok in the crowd. In fact, to Caesar, Adding a few more wounds would at most cause him to bleed a little more. This black dragon was not particularly concerned. As long as it did not touch the head, chest, heart, or other vital parts, such injuries were completely acceptable. What really made him wary was the spellcaster sitting on the horse. Arcane Missile. Just as Caesar was thinking, the Archmage had already raised his staff lightly. In one move, he directly skipped the steps of constructing spell models and locking onto the target, and instantly cast a spell. It was also one of the 3 secret spells of spellcasters, but when it was cast by Anthony, it was completely different from Anrian's Arcane Missile. They whistled with astonishing power and tore through the air with a sharp buzzing sound. Fortunately, when Caesar entered the field, most of his attention was focused on the spellcaster. Although he had now lost Luna's prophetic ability, his reaction was not much slower than before when he was in a state of high vigilance. As many as 12 elemental missiles were locked onto Caesar, who was entangled with the knight from all directions without any blind spots. The black dragon smacked his lips. His body had been modified many times, and had developed a movement ability that was completely different from ordinary creatures. This huge monster faced the spellcaster, but its body ran backward for nearly 10 meters, leaving enough time for itself to react, and then avoided the arcane missiles one by one. However, from the beginning to the end, the arcane missiles were just a cover. Anthony had already seen the ability of this black dragon, and knew that it was impossible to cause much damage to it with only basic spells. So, when the first elemental missile whizzed out, he had already begun to construct spell models. Flame Outburst. This was the killer move hidden behind the scenes. Although Anthony wanted to smash this black dragon to death with Flame Outburst, that was a spell that could only be cast by a legendary mage, and Flame Outburst was his limit. In the next second, everyone seemed to have seen a demon formed purely out of fire elemental. It roared in pain as it charged towards the black dragon at an unparalleled speed. It overtook the arrows and javelins that were flying in the air along the way and devoured all of them. Chapter 51. It was not that unexpected. An experienced archmage would not make a mistake in his long-planned attack, so the result was expected. The surging flames hit the black dragon, who had just stopped. Caesar only had time to spit out a layer of frost in front of him before he was sent flying. Blazing Gush not only brought about unparalleled high-temperature flames, but it also had a shocking impact. Being hit by such a terrifying spell, even the black dragon, which weighed about 7 tons, was sent flying off the ground. It crashed into withered trees and rocks in the air, changing its direction twice before finally falling to the ground. Large pieces of torn black scales and scattered blood were left on the ground, which were then covered by the rising smoke. Is it over? The knights were not too sure. They urged their horses to circle around the archmage, pointing their swords to the ground, and covered their noses and mouths to look at the dust. The archmage with the white beard shook his head gently. The guy inside did not die immediately. He could still feel the breath of life flowing out of him. The archmage quietly took 2 steps back. His magic power was almost dry, and it would take a while to recover. After nearly 15 seconds of silence, phew, the knights heard a deep breathing sound coming from the dust and sand. It carried a thick and heavy feeling that could not be described with words. As time went by, the sound gradually grew louder. It's the black dragon's voice. The soldiers held their weapons tightly. Smoke and dust filled the air, and the soldiers finally saw the gradually emerging huge black silhouette. It was still standing, slowly walking out of the dust. The left side of Caesar's body was completely destroyed. It was hit directly by the flame spurt, causing a shocking wound. Its scales and skin were all torn, and its body seemed to have been cleanly peeled off by something, revealing its muscles, blood vessels, and faintly beating organs. Even by the standards of dragons, this was an extremely serious injury. No matter how strong a true dragon's body was, it would not die immediately, but it would instantly lose all its combat power and fall into a state of paralysis. How could it still stand? Pain, the black dragon growled, and its already ferocious expression became even more twisted. It hurts because the left side of its body was severely injured. Its movements were obviously limited. It moved forward with a bumpy limp, which was quite funny. However, the human opposite him couldn't laugh at all. Instead, he felt a chill run down his spine. They saw that the black dragon's huge wound was growing new granulation at a speed visible to the naked eye, filling up the muscles and mending the flesh. Such a change was inconceivable to them. Something's not right. Be alert. Fall back and maintain the defensive formation. The temporary commander, Wayne, ordered. A wave of speechless strangeness made him uneasy, as if he had provoked something indescribable. His heart was beating wildly. Ouch! Attention! Disperse! Boom! In an instant, a black figure pounced into the army's formation, its tail smashing into the ground like a meteor. Caesar. His speed was even faster than before, and his strength was even greater. The explosive power of his tremendous strength allowed him to enter the battlefield in an instant. Then, as if he was smashing tofu, he smashed the human defensive formation into pieces and charged directly at the spellcasters who had long sensed that something was wrong and were retreating. What was going on? Anthony was also bewildered, but at this time, he didn't have time to think about it. He quickly opened his arms and made a hugging gesture, using the magic power that he had just recovered to pull up a defense. He built a high energy wall in front of him, blocking between himself and the black dragon. Bang! There was a crash. The old mage's forehead was covered in sweat. He was a little scared because in the same second that he cast the spell, the black dragon had already crashed into the elemental shield. How did this dragon suddenly become so fast? The reason was Prophet Seeker, Dragon Body Gene Enhancer Type 2. Caesar initially thought that this reward was the same as the Type 1, with the same effect of strengthening the body. However, this was not the case. The Type 2 drug had other effects. When the reward was obtained, a brand new organ was formed in the depths of this guy's body. It was a brand new blood vessel similar to an infusion catheter, connecting his heart and brain respectively. The main function of this organ was to produce a hormone product similar to epinephrine, but its effect was obviously much stronger than epinephrine. It could make Caesar highly focused and enter a state of extreme excitement in an instant. Once this hormone took effect, it would put a great burden on his body, squeezing Caesar's body with a maximum load capacity, causing him to burst out with combat ability that was far beyond his current normal performance. At the same time, his resistance to all kinds of pain and hallucinations would be greatly increased. Of course, all of this was unknown to Caesar. He had not yet obtained an autonomous control unit and could not specifically regulate his body as he wished. The hormone could only take effect when necessary. Protect the spellcaster. The commander's order came from the army. However, before he could finish, his voice was covered by the monster-like roar of the black dragon. This monster's head was slightly raised, its mouth open to an exaggerated angle. Its sharp fangs were clearly visible, and there was also sticky saliva on them, which was even more terrifying. Roar! With the strength of its hind legs, it stood upright like a humanoid creature. Its right forelimb was already on the shield, and it roared madly at Anthony, who was only one wall away. Then, under the horrified gaze of the archmage Anthony, the black dragon's two claws pressed on his energy shield. That defense, which was purely made of elements, was actually torn apart in the violent sound of glass shattering. Mixed with a deafening roar, the blood vessels all over the black dragon's body protruded and floated on the surface of his body. His strength, speed, and other abilities had increased by a whole lot, and he forcibly tore apart the elemental wall made of energy. This was simply unbelievable. No, no. Looking at the broken shield, Anthony first shook his head violently in disbelief, and then shouted firmly, as if to add to his own conviction. He raised his staff, squeezing his own life force to cast an elemental burst. The sapphire at the top of the staff had almost touched Caesar's body. This kind of close magic was probably stronger than normal, and there was no way to dodge it. There was no doubt that the black dragon was once again thrown out. Then, without waiting for the others to shift their gazes, Caesar rushed back at an even faster speed and solidly crashed into the body of the Archmage Anthony. This kind of strength, this kind of speed, made the Archmage feel as if he had been directly hit by the hammer of God. In an instant, blood gushed out of his mouth and nose, and his internal organs were all displaced and damaged. Chapter 52. Leaving aside the Lich. Although a spellcaster's physique was much stronger than a normal human's, it was still impossible for them to reach the standard of a warrior of the same energy level. Thus, after suffering such an unparalleled impact, Archmage Anthony quickly lost all signs of life after a brief struggle. His death was a clean one. It was worth mentioning that in this short exchange of blows, Caesar had suffered attacks that were several times more ferocious than before. His body, which had already recovered, was once again covered with wounds in an instant. It couldn't be helped. Although under the effects of the hormones, his strength, speed, and reflexes had been greatly increased, but his defensive abilities did not have much of an effect. After all, hormones were not fantasy items, and could not allow Caesar to instantly break through in the face of danger, surpassing an entire realm and becoming invincible. A situation where the difference between heaven and earth did not exist for Caesar. To be honest, the current Black Dragon was not much more powerful than before. He had only taken advantage of the information update to cause the other party to make a mistake in judgment and seize the opportunity in one fell swoop to achieve such a result. In other words, under the situation where the other party had sufficient understanding and was vigilant, Caesar still could not kill Archmage Anthony. Because he had touched the other party's sore spot, the mage was the most important part of the army. The knight's attacks from behind had caused considerable damage to Caesar. However, all of this was no longer important. The mage was dead, and Caesar had obtained the most fruitful result of this battle. He did not care about the rest. Moreover, through the various feedback from his body, the Black Dragon knew that although he seemed to have become stronger, the actual situation was not optimistic. He did not know when he would drop the ball. The hormones had caused him to enter a state of excitement, but this did not mean that Caesar had lost his mind. After a brief analysis, this fellow turned around and fled. First, he used his powerful strength to rush out of the encirclement of the knights. Then, like an airplane taking off, he ran for tens of meters, flapped his wings, and flew into the sky. At the same time, the attack on a main battlefield had already ended. The orcs fearlessly attacked the 10 heavy ballistae, and finally, after paying the price of nearly 30 warriors' lives, they finally destroyed all the ballistae. Regardless of subjective opinions, it was not easy for them to achieve such a result against an elite army. The main reason why they were able to succeed so smoothly was mainly because of Archmage's save. The spellcasters and knights of the human army had all been transferred away. The Black Dragon had attracted most of their forces, and they had lost most of their means of retaliation against the orc wizards that suddenly appeared. The orcs followed the Black Dragon's instructions. Even if they had the ability to further increase their victory, they were not blinded by the benefits before them. After completing the mission, they quickly began to retreat to avoid being surrounded by Roy's other army. 15 minutes after the battle, Roy's ants, Roy's, and Roy's return. Roy's, SSS, and this. What's going on? His face was gloomy, although no one present was more annoyed than him. And even though he was so angry that he was about to go crazy, he still had to maintain his composure without showing his emotions. He was the backbone of the army. If he went mad, cursed, and whipped the soldiers to vent his anger, then the army would completely collapse. In the eyes of the squires, such actions were equivalent to announcing the defeat of the war. Roy would never do that. My lord, The soldier closest to Roy knelt down on one knee while leaning on his sword. His two-handed sword was already bent, and there were lacerations on his hands. It was obvious that he had experienced an extremely difficult and high-intensity battle and had fought a bloody battle. The orcs attacked our camp and destroyed the ballistae. Sweat was still dripping from the soldier's helmet. His face was red with shame. They destroyed the ballistae. Roy clenched his hands behind his back. His gaze swept across the pile of scrap metal in the corner. His expression was uncertain. Then why are you still alive? There's a spellcaster among them, my lord. The soldier's head lowered even more. He's a great mage. Even if we give up our lives, we won't be able to stop him. What a poor excuse. As the army of the Brendel family, there's no reason for you to be defeated by an orc tribe. Roy gestured for the soldier in front of him to stand up. He stared at the silent soldiers behind him. This result makes me feel ashamed. If you encounter the orcs again, you know what to do. Will there be a next time? Roy did not know, but he still had to say what he had to say. But in the current situation, he could not sprinkle salt on the wounds of these soldiers. Otherwise, if their morale fell to a freezing point, they would not even know if they could successfully retreat from the wilderness. How long did the battle last? Roy took a few steps forward and crouched down in front of the pile of scrap metal. He held the broken parts of the ballistae in his hands and asked. Less than 10 minutes. The soldier behind him immediately replied. This is madness. The young noble's heart skipped a beat. He knew the strength of his troops. Even though there were less than 300 soldiers left, it was still not something that the orcs could defeat in 10 minutes. This was an almost impossible task. The orc's goal was the ballistae, but before he left, he had specifically instructed the soldiers to protect the 10 ballistae. He trusted his subordinates unconditionally. There was no need to ask to know that the soldiers who stayed behind did not go easy on them. They must have done their best to protect the ballistae. However, under such circumstances, the orcs only needed 10 minutes to complete their goal. They destroyed all the ballistas and successfully retreated. There was only one possibility for them to do this. Based on the reports from his subordinates, the traces of the battle, and the remnants of magic power, Roy was almost certain that the old sorcerer from the Stone Crow clan had exhausted his body's potential in order to complete the mission. He had even used up his life force to cast spells. Other than madness, what else could be used to describe it? That old man did not have many years left to live, but he was still trying so hard. It was as if he did not want to live anymore. If it was not for the old wizard, even if his soldiers could not defeat the orcs, they could at least delay the orcs for 10 to 15 minutes, or even longer, until he returned and completed the encirclement. Roy did not expect the Stone Crow clan to go to such an extent. Wait, the young noble thought. Suddenly, he thought of something and stood up from the ground. Why is the cavalry not back yet? It was impossible for a human's physical strength to sustain such a long battle. If his cavalry had been chasing after the Black Dragon until now, they should have been exhausted. Wayne was not that stupid. Regardless of whether they gave up the chase or not, they should have returned by now. Why was there no sign of them until now? Unless this troop was also in trouble. Roy had a bad feeling. He took out a crystal from a pile of crystals in the lining of his gray robe. This was a one-time use magic item. It was very common in Iradia and had a wide range of uses. It contained the magic power of the spellcaster, Anthony. After it was broken, it could resonate with other crystals that contained the same magic power, transmitting sound and images. It was widely used for long-distance communication. Roy crushed the crystal with all his might. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.